Something weird happened to me a few years ago, and I'm going to do my best to get the details right. I had been using Hinge on and off for about a year, and at the time I hadn't met anybody special. One night though, I matched with Julie, a girl who seemed too good to be true. We hit it off right away, and it seemed that she was into me as well. I have a pretty good eye for fake profiles, and this one looked real, even though she was gorgeous. But still, I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that I was being catfished, so I decided to look her up on social media. She hadn't linked anything in her profile, but she did tell me where she worked, and one of her pictures was of her college graduation. That let me know where she went to school and in which year. With that information, it wasn't hard to find her profile on Facebook. It all seemed to check out. The photos matched, and the Facebook profile was created back in 2009. This happened in 2022, so I knew the Facebook account was real. I wanted to add her as a friend or send a message just to make sure, but I didn't want her to know that I looked her up. I thought it would come off as creepy. We kept on messaging for a while, then eventually I asked her out. She said yes, and then suggested that we meet at a tea house downtown, a spot that I wasn't familiar with. However, it wasn't far from my building, just a 10-minute bus ride. I arrived about 5 minutes early and stood out front. I noticed right away that the place was closed. It was 7:30, and the tea house was only open until 5 on weekends. I thought I would just wait there until she arrived, and then we would find something else, but then my phone buzzed. When I checked my messages, there was one from Julie. She told me that the tea house was closed, and asked me to meet her at the parking lot of the grocery store next door. It was closed for the night as well, but I guess she was going to park there, and then we would find a bar. I wasn't planning on getting into a stranger's car. Not even I am that stupid. The parking lot was literally right around the corner, so I walked over and peeked in. It was nearly empty, except for a single car parked way at the end. The parking lot was dark, but the car had its headlights on. Something felt off, but I cautiously approached the car anyway. As I inched closer, through the windshield, I could make out the figure of a man in the front seat. With that, I knew something was up. I snapped a picture with my phone and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't know if I could do anything with the picture, but it was worth a try. It was not very clear, and the license plate was not readable. At the time, I was thinking I would just have to chalk this one up to experience, because no harm was really done. I walked home feeling a little disappointed, but no big deal. When I checked Hinge later though, Julie had blocked me. Not surprising at all, because I knew she was just some guy. That was when I remembered the Facebook profile. I logged on and saw it was still there. I still thought it was real, and if somebody was using her identity to catfish people, then it would only be fair to let her know. I sent the real Julie a message explaining what happened to me. Her response came the next day. She told me that she didn't even have a profile on Hinge, so somebody was definitely stealing her identity. She asked if I saw the person and wanted to know every detail. I told her that I saw him, but didn't get a good look, and then I attached the picture that I took of the car, not thinking that it would be much help. The next reply from her was truly shocking. Julie recognized the car and the man in the driver's seat, even though it was unclear. She told me that it was her stepfather. He had stolen her identity to trick guys on dating apps. Pretty creepy stuff. Julie and I continued to message back and forth, trying to piece together what happened. She was understandably upset and embarrassed about what her stepfather had done. We speculated on various scenarios, but she was always insistent that he wouldn't have hurt me. I didn't blame her for taking that stance, but I don't necessarily agree. Anyone who's capable of doing something so creepy is capable of all kinds of things. And if he wasn't going to hurt me, then what would he have done if I got into that car? Just laugh and say gotcha? Not likely. That guy was going to do something horrible that night, and I got away. I think he needs to be watched closely, but he didn't really do anything illegal to me, so the police couldn't do much. Maybe it was illegal to steal his stepdaughter's identity, but I don't think she wanted to press charges. My only hope is that somebody's keeping an eye on that guy, because he's seriously disturbed. This happened back in 2010, when I had first started using some of the dating apps. It was before I even had a smartphone, so it was pretty much just eHarmony and Plenty of Fish that I was on. I know that there are a lot more of them now, but I never got into those ones. And luckily, I'm off the market now, so I never had to experience what singles are going through these days. That being said, I did have one creepy experience with online dating, and I would like to share that one now. I was scrolling through some profiles on Plenty of Fish, and I sent a few messages out. For those who don't know, you didn't have to swipe back then. It was just a big list of pictures, and you could message anyone. Therefore, you wouldn't get responses most of the time, because they might not have even been interested at all. I was getting a little frustrated, and almost gave up, but then I got a reply from a girl named Carrie. We hit it off alright, and she did a good job of keeping the conversation interesting. It was refreshing compared to most others, where getting a reply was hard, and getting more than a one-word answer was rare. Carrie seemed interested, and I was excited about that. After a few days of constant messaging, we decided to meet up for drinks. It felt right, or at least as right as anything could feel when you're about to meet a stranger from the internet. This would have only been my third online date, so I was still new to it. The others didn't lead anywhere, but they were not terrible experiences. Carrie sent me her number, and then I sent her a text so that she would have mine. When the day of our date came, I sent her a text to confirm. She replied asking for a change of plans. She explained that her cat had suddenly gotten sick, and she needed to stay home to take care of him, but she still wanted to meet, and suggested that I come over to her place. A red flag? Maybe, but at the time it seemed like a genuine, albeit unfortunate turn of events. She sent over the address, and after hesitating for a minute, I accepted. I arrived at the building, which was a large apartment building, and there was a major bus station nearby. Standing in front of the entrance, I sent her a quick message to let her know I was there. Seconds later, she approached me from behind, catching me off guard. When I turned around, I saw that her face matched the photos that I had seen on her profile. That was somewhat of a relief, because at least I knew that I wasn't being catfished. I was a little nervous though, but not as much as before. She opened the door, and we made our way up to her apartment. The halls of the building were drab and outdated. The elevator was small and felt shaky. It was definitely a lower-end building, not unlike the one where I was living at the time though. When we got to the apartment on the 6th floor, Carrie opened the door and led me inside. She excused herself to use the bathroom shortly after we arrived, leaving me alone in the living room. That's when I noticed it. There were voices coming from one of the bedrooms. She didn't mention having a roommate, but I guess it wasn't impossible. That'd be an awkward thing if her roommate was around though. And if there was somebody else home, then couldn't they take care of the cat? I was freaked out while I sat there, but then I noticed something else. I hadn't seen any pet-related items when I was there, and no sign of the cat. Even more troubling, there was not a strand of pet hair on any of the furniture. I'd had animals before, and I know how impossible it is to get rid of cat hair. There would have been some. Something didn't feel right, and the more I listened, the more convinced I became that I didn't want to be there. Quietly, I stood up and made my way to the door, and then I slipped out of the apartment. No sooner had the door clicked shut behind me than I heard the sound of movement from one of the bedrooms, and I heard heavy footsteps, unmistakably those of a large man, not a small girl like Carrie. As I was waiting for the elevator in the hallway, I heard the door to the apartment open. A man stuck his head out the door and looked over to me. Then the door closed, and I heard the lock slide into place. I didn't know what was going on in that apartment, but it was really suspicious. Once I was safely outside, I pulled out my phone to check if I had any messages from Carrie. Honestly, I wasn't even going to bother saying anything. I would have been happy enough to forget about her, and not even bother asking what was going on. There was nothing though, so I just went home. When I got home, I checked Plenty of Fish, and Carrie's profile was gone. I'm not sure if she deleted it, or if she just blocked me. Every message that we exchanged was gone, erasing any evidence that our interaction ever even occurred. Maybe she was mad that I ditched her, or maybe she wanted to destroy the evidence that I was ever there. In retrospect, the signs were there, subtle but unmistakable indicators that something was wrong. The last-minute change of plans, the man in the apartment, and the missing cat were all enough to raise major red flags. I never got any real closure about what happened, but I did make it out safely, and I'm thankful for that. Whenever I tell this story, I'm glad that I'm not dating anymore. Based on what I've heard, things have gotten pretty crazy out there. For all of you that are still trying to find someone, please be careful. Take the lesson from me, and don't learn it the hard way. I downloaded the Tinder app a few years after it started to become popular. At the time, I was 22, and I had a room in a shared house with some guys who I didn't really know. It was a lonely time in my life, because I didn't know anybody in my city. My roommates were alright, but they all had their own lives, so I was the odd one out most of the time. I knew that Tinder was supposed to be a hookup app, but I really was looking for more of a connection, silly as that sounds. Because of that, I wasn't just swiping on the hottest girls, I was swiping on pretty much everyone. I guess I had some beginner's luck in my first few days, because I got over 10 matches. I was scrolling through them, trying to decide which one to message, when a message came in. That was a surprise, because I thought that most girls didn't like to make the first move. I was excited though, and replied right away. After an hour of chatting, I asked to meet, and she agreed. Her name was Claire, and she was 20 years old, a student, with curly blonde hair. Her pictures were really good, almost professional looking. When I told Claire where I lived, she suggested that we meet at a park that was not too far away. She never told me where she lived, but I figured it couldn't be far if she wanted to meet there. On the night of our date, I microwaved some food and ate in my room, then I left without telling any of my roommates. It was late fall, and it was getting cold, but not too bad. I had a sweatshirt on, and a thick jacket that was undone. It was during this walk that I noticed a white van pass by me. At first I didn't think much of it, but then the same van passed me again, slower this time. I looked over at it, but at that angle, I wasn't able to see the driver. Eventually the van disappeared from my sight, and 5 minutes later, I turned down the street that the park was on. When I got close to the entrance, I saw that the van was parked on the street. I remember thinking, great, now I'm being stalked by some creep in a van. Still, I was there to meet Claire, not to chicken out because of some random guy. I cut through the park and made my way to the bench where we agreed to meet. Then I checked my phone to see if there were any messages from Claire. There weren't any, so I sat there and waited. It was still early, so I didn't want to message her and sound desperate. At exactly the time when we were supposed to meet, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Claire asking me to meet her on the other side of the park. It was no problem, but I didn't know why she couldn't just meet where we agreed before. It wasn't worth arguing over, so I went with it. That meant walking past the van, though. As I approached the van, I could see that the side door was slightly ajar, which struck me as odd. Just as I was about to pass by, the door swung open fully, and an older man stepped out. I was face to face with him for a split second, before he tried to grab me. I pulled away, but he caught the sleeve of my jacket with his hand. I tried to squirm free, but there was no way he was letting go. All the while, he was grabbing at my other arm with his free hand. It was not looking good for me, because this man was way bigger than me, and with that creepy van right next to us, I knew that if he got me, then I would be screwed. As a last resort, I got out of my jacket, rolling on the ground to wriggle free. Once I was out, I backed away a fair distance from the man. He was just standing there next to the van looking at me. He was still holding my jacket, but surprisingly, he never chased me. He was strong, but fortunately for me, he was not a runner. I didn't stick around any longer to find out what he wanted, and I ran away. I didn't stop until I was away from the park, and back to the relative safety of a busier road. I glanced back once to see if I was being followed, but I wasn't. I could still see the white van in the distance. It looked like it still hadn't moved. I was almost back home, and I was on a busier road with some bars and fast food places. That's when I saw the van again. It cruised by slowly, and slowed even further as it passed me. I looked over, and the driver's side window was down. I could see that the driver was the man who attacked me earlier. Our eyes met for a moment, and the chill that went down my spine was unlike anything I'd ever felt. The man behind the wheel had a look that was both ugly and scary. His eyes were cold, the kind that seemed like they could look right through you, and I knew without a doubt that his intentions were far from good. I tried to see the license plate from the van, but it was covered up by something. I stood there frozen on the sidewalk, watching as it disappeared into the night. I realized how close I had come to a potentially disastrous situation. My initial excitement about meeting Claire had turned into a nightmare scenario that I was lucky to escape from, and I pulled out my phone and called the police. I reported the van and the man, describing the events in as much detail as I could remember. But even as I ended the call, a part of me doubted they would find him. Before I went anywhere near my house, I scanned the street for the van. The last thing I wanted was to lead him to my home. When I was sure it was safe, I went inside and headed straight for my room. It was only then that I even bothered to open Tinder and block Claire, or whoever she was. By then I was pretty sure she was fake, and when I opened our conversation, I had a new message from her. It read, "Nice jacket." That weirdo was taunting me. I took a screenshot for the police, but didn't give them the satisfaction of a response. After this, I didn't use Tinder again for a long time. Years later, I had some alright experiences with it, so take that for what you will. Always be careful though. I've had some bizarre experiences with dating apps, but there's one that stands out. It was during my second year of college. At the time, I was still living with my parents. They had gone away for the weekend, leaving me home alone in the empty house. I was alone all day, trying to get some work done, but decided to take a break in the evening. I was watching some TV and feeling lonely, so I began swiping through Tinder, hoping to meet someone. It wasn't long before I matched with a girl named Susan. She wasn't the prettiest girl I had ever seen, but then again, maybe I'm not the hottest myself. I started off by asking her a few questions. She answered quickly, but her responses were really short. I wasn't sure if she was interested at first, but out of nowhere, she suggested coming over to my place. It struck me as forward, especially since we hardly knew each other, but I was lonely and a little desperate, so the thought of meeting someone that night was tempting to me. I sent her my address without much thought. Within about half an hour, a car pulled into my front driveway. I was watching from the front door. She got out of the car and walked up to where I was waiting on the porch. The moment Susan walked through the door, I felt uncomfortable. It was weird enough having a perfect stranger in my house, but she didn't help. Susan was very shy and awkward, not that I can blame her. Maybe she was feeling the same nerves that I was. We made our way into the living room, and I turned on the TV in an attempt to fill the awkward silence. We watched some show for a while, then I tried to spark up a conversation, but it was like talking to a wall. Susan offered little more than single-word responses, and it became painfully clear that there was no spark between us. It was clear to me anyway. As the night dragged on, I wanted her to go. I hinted more than once that it was getting late, hoping she'd take the cue and leave, but she didn't. Eventually, my patience wore thin, and I told her directly that I was heading to bed, and that she needed to leave. It felt rude, but that seemed to get through to her, and I walked her to the front door. I watched her car pull out of the driveway and turn around the corner of my street. By then, it was not even 10 o'clock, and I usually don't go to bed until 1 or 2, so the night was still young. After she was gone, I checked my phone and saw a message from my friend Drew, inviting me over. I knew that he was on a date that night too, so I guess that his didn't go well either. He lived just around the corner, so I thought I would go over there for a bit. After a quick shower and some food, I was ready to go to my friend's place. It was around 10:45 by the time I stepped out. It was a fairly quiet neighborhood, and I was the only one out on the sidewalk. I didn't even see any cars driving by. As I rounded the corner on my street towards Drew's house, there was a car parked on the side of the road facing me. It stuck out to me because it was technically on the wrong side of the street. Its light suddenly turned on, and the engine came to life. Before I knew what was happening, it was hurtling towards me. I leapt out of the way, landing in somebody's front yard. The car screeched to a halt, just in time to avoid running into a fence. There was a lamppost right overhead, and I noticed that it looked like Susan's car. When I looked closer, I could tell that it was Susan. She was glaring at me from behind the wheel. That crazy girl had tried to run me over. That also meant that she was out there waiting for me for about an hour. She must have been pissed that I lied to her and said that I was going to bed. In a second, the car started up again and she drove away, leaving me there on the ground. I ran the rest of the way to Drew's house. When I got there, I told him the whole story. He let me stay over at his place that night because I was way too scared to go home. The next day in the morning, I went back to my house. I was half expecting the whole place to be trashed by Susan, but to my relief, she didn't do anything. I went inside and checked the whole house, just to satisfy my paranoia, but there was no sign that she had been back. I then opened Tinder to check my messages, and probably block Susan. When I opened the messages, there were a bunch from her. They were a mess of angry, barely coherent rants, filled with spelling mistakes and profanities. The content was hard to decipher, but the intent was clear. She was furious. Rejection is tough for anyone to deal with, but we need to control ourselves. Sure, I could have been more honest with her, but she wasn't picking up on my cues. I wanted to end the night, so I told her that I was going to bed. She must have gone out there and waited to make sure I didn't go out. She was out there waiting for me for an hour, but I wonder how much longer she would have sat there. I still wonder if she was actually going to kill me that night. It looked like I was going to be run over, but once I got out of the way the first time, she could have tried again, but she didn't. Maybe she just wanted to scare me, If that's what she wanted, then it definitely worked. I didn't use any dating apps for a while afterwards, and I never saw or heard from Susan again. When I was 25, I decided to try online dating on OkCupid. I'd finished college a few years earlier, and I was living on my own for the first time. I had a decent job, a nice apartment, and was happy with most of my life, but I still felt like something was missing. I wanted a girlfriend and thought online dating could help. I made a profile, filled it out honestly, and started browsing. I messaged a few people, but nothing really clicked for the first few days. I was about to take a break from the whole thing, but on a whim, I decided to sign in one more time on the weekend. As soon as I opened the app, I saw that I'd matched with a girl named Alice. She was cute and seemed smart. She messaged back quickly, and we were soon talking every day. We traded stories about work, favorite movies, and weekend plans. It felt like we really connected. Eventually, she asked if I'd like to meet in person. I was excited and maybe a little nervous since I hadn't done much online dating before. In fact, I was still pretty new to dating in general. Alice suggested I come over to her place on the following weekend. She mentioned her roommate would be out of town, so we'd have the apartment to ourselves. I thought it sounded great, a quiet place with no awkward restaurant or bar to distract us. We planned to order in some food, maybe watch a movie, and see how things went. I made sure to clean up, dress decently, and even picked up a bottle of wine to bring along. When the day came, I left my place feeling optimistic. I was thinking that this might actually be something special. When I got to her building, it wasn't exactly what I'd pictured. It was old and very run down. The paint on the outside was faded and chipped. When I went in through the first set of large glass doors, the lobby felt dim and uninviting. I hesitated, but called her anyway. She buzzed me in, so I went for it. The elevator was small and rickety, with only enough space for 4 people at the most. It creaked and shook all the way up. I half expected it to stop or break down, but I made it to the 4th floor, which is where Alice's apartment was. The hallway wasn't much better. The carpet was faded and stained, and the lighting was also dim. A couple of doors were missing numbers, and I wondered if I'd made a mistake coming here. When I knocked on her door, she opened it almost immediately and looked exactly like her pictures, which was a relief. Inside, her apartment was much nicer than the building itself, tidy, warm, and well decorated. We sat on her couch, poured some wine, and started chatting. It felt natural, like we'd known each other a while. We talked for a long time, and eventually, things escalated. We started kissing, then one thing led to another until we moved to her bedroom. I felt good about how the night was going, but then I heard a door open. I thought it was her roommate back early, but she froze and whispered to me. She told me to hide. I realized quickly that this wasn't her roommate, and that I might have walked into something. I got into her closet, just as a man entered the room. I could only see parts of what was happening, but I could hear everything. Right away, I could tell that he was angry. They started arguing, and I tried to keep as quiet as possible. I was crammed in the back of the closet, my knees were bent, and I was barely able to move. I wondered how long I'd have to stay there, but I kept listening, waiting for a chance to get out. She tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having any of it. At one point, he started raising his voice. Surprisingly, it wasn't anything about me. He still didn't know that I was there. It was just some unrelated fight that I had nothing to do with. Maybe I wasn't the first random guy she'd brought over. Still, it made me scared to think of how pissed off he would be if he found me in the closet. After what felt like forever, he left the room to go to the bathroom. I took the chance to slip out. I got out of the closet, crept across the room, and made it to the front door. I was trying to be as quiet as I could, but as I was pulling on my shoes, he came back and saw me. He shouted, and I froze for a second before trying to explain. I told him that I didn't know she had a boyfriend. He looked furious, but he held back and didn't make a move toward me. I left through the front door with one shoe on, but the guy followed me. I speed walked to the elevator, but I knew that it wouldn't get there before the man got to me. I got there, hit the button, and then turned around to defend myself. I put my hands up and forward to keep some distance between us. He was yelling in my face and trying to get closer. As he pushed me back, I kept trying to keep him away from me. He wasn't throwing any punches, but I could tell that he wanted to. Eventually, he had me against a wall, but then the elevator finally arrived. I slipped out from in front of him and got over to the open doors of the elevator. I got in, and he watched me go, still seething. I didn't say anything else, and as the doors closed, I finally started to feel safe again. Later, Alice texted me as if nothing unusual had happened. In fact, she asked if I wanted to meet up again. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked her number and decided to take a break from online dating for a while. In 2018, I was 25 and working at a law firm. This was not long after I graduated from college. On paper, it seemed like a good setup. I had a stable job, solid pay, and a clear path for advancement. People told me I was lucky to have found something right away, especially in a competitive field like this. But despite all that, I wasn't happy. I didn't like the corporate lifestyle, the strict hours, or the endless office politics. I was spending most of my time at work and feeling like I was missing out on my 20s. I kept imagining myself at 30, looking back and regretting how I'd spent these years. Eventually, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I quit the job, knowing I'd have to figure things out later. With some savings and a few things packed into a backpack, I took off with plans to travel. My first destination was Australia, where I'd gotten a year-long working holiday visa. The idea was to work a bit, save up, then explore as much as possible. Australia was incredible. I spent time on beaches, made friends with other travelers, and took a few odd jobs to stretch my savings. But as much as I liked it, I wanted to see more. I wanted to get out of the western bubble of the backpacking circuit in Australia. That was when I started hearing about Southeast Asia from other people. They'd go on about the beaches in Thailand, the food in Vietnam, and the temples in Cambodia. It sounded amazing, and I liked the idea of immersing myself in a totally different culture. After a few more months in Australia, I decided to book a ticket to Bangkok, Thailand. I arrived with a plan to see the major sites, but I didn't set anything in stone. Bangkok was busy, chaotic, and exciting. I loved it. After a few days, I downloaded Tinder. It seemed like a good way to meet people, especially since I was traveling alone and open to making connections. I'd heard from friends that dating apps were popular with travelers, so I thought I'd give it a try. I didn't expect much, maybe a good conversation or someone to explore the city with. And that's how I ended up matching with Jenna. Jenna was from the UK. She was around my age and had been in Thailand for a couple of weeks. We got along well right away. She seemed easygoing, friendly, and there was something about meeting someone from a similar background that felt comforting. She suggested we meet up for drinks, and I agreed. That night, we met at a small bar off a busy street. We talked, laughed, and had a good time. I remember feeling relaxed, like I was finally enjoying the kind of freedom I'd been looking for. We stayed out late, moving from one place to another, and had a lot of drinks along the way. By the end of the night, I was definitely feeling drunk, but Jenna didn't seem fazed. She suggested we go back to her hotel, which was nearby. I agreed, thinking it was just going to be a low-key end to the night. I don't remember a lot after that. I remember getting to her place, but things got blurry quickly. I didn't know at the time if it was the alcohol, but my memory started to fade. I remember flashes of being in a small room and seeing her talk to two men. The next thing I knew, I woke up in my own room. My head was pounding, and I felt sick, worse than any hangover I'd ever had. My phone and wallet were missing, and I couldn't remember how I'd even gotten back. I looked around my room, trying to piece things together, but nothing made sense. I felt nauseous, and it took everything just to get up and splash some water on my face. I had this vague sense that something had gone wrong, but I didn't know what to make of it. All I knew was that I'd gone out with Jenna and ended up back here without my stuff. Still feeling awful, I decided to go to the hospital. I needed to make sure there wasn't something seriously wrong with me. The doctors checked me out, asked some questions, and told me that it was likely I'd been drugged. That hit me hard. I'd heard of people being drugged, but I never thought it would happen to me. Everything started to make sense then. The fading memory, the missing wallet, the overall feeling of being messed up. It was a shock, and I didn't know what to do next. After leaving the hospital, I went to the police to report what had happened. They listened but didn't seem too surprised. They explained that it was a common scam in the area. They said some travelers were targeted, especially if they looked like they had money. I felt frustrated, but knew there wasn't much they could do. Without my phone, I didn't even have a picture of Jenna to show them, and I didn't have many details to give. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together what had happened that night. A few memories came back, but they were only small glimpses. I remembered being led into her hotel room, feeling out of it, and seeing two men there. I remembered Jenna talking to them while I was sitting there, but that was about it. I didn't know what their plan had been, but I was just glad I'd made it out safely, even if I'd lost my wallet and phone. After a few days, I realized it was time to leave. I'd come to Southeast Asia looking for adventure, but I'd ended up with a serious wake-up call. I booked a ticket back home and decided to figure things out from there. I had a rough breakup when I was 19. It was really messy because we had been living together for almost 6 months at the time. Our families were close too, and I thought we would get married for sure. When that didn't work out, I was feeling pretty burned out on relationships. I decided I'd take a break from dating, which ended up lasting a few years. I focused on college and put the idea of romance on the back burner. By the time I was ready to try again, I felt like I'd forgotten how to even approach dating. Things had changed a lot in those few years. The whole online dating thing was well underway, and a lot of people I knew were trying it. My best friend Julie had met her boyfriend on an app, and she kept telling me that it was an easy way to meet people without all the awkward first encounters. One night, after a bit of convincing, Julie and I set up my profile on OkCupid. She helped me pick out some photos, write a bio, and add a few interests to make it look less bare. I started messaging a few people here and there, and after a couple of weeks, I got a message from a guy named Chuck. He seemed cool at first. He was a little quirky, but we had some things in common. We liked the same kinds of movies, and he played guitar, which I thought was cool. We messaged back and forth for a few weeks, getting a little more comfortable with each other. Eventually, he asked if I wanted to meet up, and he suggested coming over to his place for dinner and a movie. I felt a bit unsure about it. Going to a stranger's place for a first date didn't sound smart, but when I told Julie, she said it was pretty common for online dates. She'd had a few dates like that, and things had always turned out fine. I was a bit rusty with dating, so I figured maybe I was just overthinking things. Chuck seemed normal, and we'd been talking for a while, so I agreed to meet him at his place for the date. Looking back, I probably should have trusted my gut. On the night of the date, I showed up at Chuck's building and saw him waiting by the front door. He gave me a bit of an awkward hug, which didn't help the weird feeling I already had, but I brushed it off. He seemed shy, and I thought maybe he was just as nervous as I was. We went up to his apartment, and he told me he'd be cooking for us. But once we got inside, it turned out he'd just ordered takeout instead. It wasn't a big deal, but I did wonder why he'd say he was cooking if he was just going to order in. We ate, and the conversation was fine, though a bit stilted. I figured maybe that was just first date nerves. After dinner, we moved to his couch to watch a movie. He picked some horror flick that I'd never heard of. It wasn't really my thing, but I didn't want to seem difficult, so I went along with it. About halfway through, his behavior started to make me uncomfortable. He kept inching closer to me, then started putting his hand on my shoulder, then around my waist. It just felt like too much. I tried to focus on the movie, but he kept making these strange comments. He was asking if I was scared, or telling me how he'd protect me if it was real. His tone was strange, more like he was testing me than joking. It got worse when he started touching my hair, making these remarks about how soft it was. I felt trapped, like I'd made a mistake coming here, but I didn't want to overreact. I tried to casually move away a few times, but he just moved closer again. Finally, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. As soon as I shut the door, I called for an Uber. Then I called Julie and told her what was going on. She agreed it was time to bail, so I pulled myself together and prepared to leave. I went back out to the living room and told him that I had to go. I kept it simple and said that I'd remembered an early meeting in the morning and needed to get home. He didn't look happy about it. In fact, he looked angry. He probably knew I was making an excuse to get out of there. If he was a decent guy, then he would have just taken it like a man. He stood up quickly and blocked my way to the door for a moment, like he was trying to decide if he'd let me leave. I stayed calm but firm, repeating that I really had to go. He finally stepped aside, but he gave me a hard look that made me want to get out as quickly as I could. I slipped my shoes on in the entryway, but one of them came loose as I turned to leave. I didn't care. I just grabbed my things, opened the door, and practically jogged down the hall. I crossed to the other side of the street to put some distance between myself and his building. A few minutes later, my Uber arrived, and I hopped in. I was grateful to be going home. That experience put me off dating for a while. For the next 6 months, I avoided apps and stuck to hanging out with friends. Eventually, I eased back into dating, but from then on, I had a rule. I'd never meet at someone's place for a first date again. This happened during my first year of college. I'd moved to a new city for school, and I didn't know anyone from before. Everything was new. The classes, the city, even the people. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be whoever I wanted, and no one would expect me to be a certain way. I made a few friends during the first month, and we'd go to the dining hall together, hang out in the dorms, and occasionally go out for coffee. One of my new friends, Dana, was outgoing and knew almost everyone, so I saw her a lot. One afternoon, Dana introduced me to a guy named James. I could tell by the way she and a few of our friends acted that they were trying to set us up. She casually mentioned that we had some things in common and thought we might hit it off. I wasn't opposed to the idea, and since I was just getting to know people anyway, I figured it wouldn't hurt to give it a chance. James was alright when I first met him, and he was easy to talk to. He was studying business, which was way different from my major, but we managed to find a few things to chat about during that first meeting. I agreed to meet him for coffee that weekend to get to know him better. It felt strange, but in a way, I was excited too. College was a fresh start, and I was open to trying new things. Even though it felt a little awkward, I told myself it was just coffee. At the very least, I'd get to know someone new, and if there was a connection, great. If not, no harm done. When the weekend came, I met James at a small coffee shop just off campus. The place was quiet, with only a few other students sitting around, so I felt like I could relax a bit. James showed up on time, which I appreciated, and he ordered a coffee before joining me at a table by the window. At first it felt okay, just like a normal conversation. We talked about classes, college life, and the usual stuff that comes up. As the conversation went on, though, I started noticing that James was pretty focused on himself. He told me all about his classes, his friends, his plans for after college. I tried to chime in here and there, but he rarely asked me about myself. I didn't want to be rude, so I nodded along and listened, trying to keep the conversation going. There wasn't any real connection, though, and after an hour, I could tell it wasn't going anywhere. When we finally wrapped up, I felt a bit of relief. He hadn't done anything wrong exactly, but the whole thing just felt off. Later, Dana called and asked how it went. I was honest with her and told her I didn't see it going anywhere. She sounded disappointed, but she understood. She told me it was no big deal and that she wouldn't push it. I thought that was the end of it. The next day, though, Dana called me again. This time her voice was tense. She said that James hadn't taken the news well when she told him I wasn't interested. She said he seemed really angry and was saying some pretty harsh things. She warned me to steer clear of him if I saw him around campus. That made me nervous, but I figured if I avoided him, things would calm down eventually. Over the next few weeks, I spotted James a few times around campus. He never approached me, but every time I saw him, I felt a chill. I started taking a few different routes to get to classes just in case I'd run into him. I didn't want any drama, and I hoped he'd just move on. Then one evening, I had a late class that ended at around 9. The campus was mostly empty, and as I walked along a quiet path leading back to my dorm, I turned a corner and suddenly saw him standing there. James was a few feet in front of me, and I could tell right away that something was off. He looked furious. His eyes were wild, and he clenched his fists as he started yelling at me. He was going on about how I thought I was too good for him. I tried to stay calm and kept my distance, but it was clear that he was going crazy. He kept getting closer, and at one point, he went a step too far. He was really in my face. That's when I decided it was time to go. I turned and ran back down the path, hoping he wouldn't follow. I could hear him shouting, but I didn't look back. My dorm wasn't far, and I managed to make it back the long way without him catching up. Once I was safely inside, I called campus security and told them what happened. They told me they'd keep an eye out, but I didn't hear anything back that night. I didn't have any trouble with James after that, and eventually I was able to relax. After this whole thing, Dana and some of my other friends decided to cut him off as well. She tried to act like it wasn't just because of what he did to me, but I think it really was. They had my back through the whole ordeal, and I always appreciated them for that. My name's January, but most people call me Jan. I was 19 at the time, and I had been talking to a guy named Curtis on Tinder for a few days. He seemed normal enough at first, and his profile didn't have anything weird on it, and he didn't message me anything creepy right off the bat. Just a, hey, how's it going, and some decent small talk. We went back and forth a bit, and he didn't seem pushy or fake, so I kept replying. After a couple of days, he asked if I wanted to do a video call. I figured that was a good sign because most guys just wanted to text or maybe send a few snaps, but he actually wanted to talk face to face. The call was maybe 15 minutes, and he seemed pretty chill. His voice matched what I expected, and he had the same face as his pictures. Short dark hair, kind of average looking, but not bad, and nothing stood out in a bad way. I wasn't trying to hook up or get into anything serious. I just wanted to talk to someone new and see if maybe we clicked. I'd had a few bad dates before, so I was already cautious. I told myself I'd just take it slow, and if I got a weird vibe, I'd leave. By Friday night, he asked if I wanted to come hang out. He said he was just going to be watching a movie and chilling. I was nervous, but he didn't push. He just said it'd be cool to finally meet in person, and I could head out anytime if it wasn't my thing. I figured why not, because I wasn't doing anything else, and I'd been bored for weeks. I told him I wasn't into anything casual or physical, and he said he understood, and I took that at face value. I texted a friend where I was going and gave her the address. I also told her I'd check in when I got there, and again when I left. She said to call if anything felt off. We had a whole system, because both of us had been through enough Tinder stuff to know better. The drive wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes from where I lived. It was a quiet area, not out in the country or anything. Just one of those newer suburbs with the same 5 types of houses, repeated over and over. It was a little run-down in parts, which seemed weird for a newer area, but nothing sketchy, and it was not a place I'd be nervous driving through. I was still going back and forth in my head, wondering if I should turn around, but I decided to go anyway. He had sent me an address earlier that day, and I double-checked it before leaving, and again when I parked. I didn't want to end up at the wrong place like an idiot. The house was dark though, which felt strange. There was no porch light, no window light, nothing. I sat in my car for a minute and texted him to say I was there. He didn't reply right away, so I got out and walked up to the door. There were still no lights on, but I knocked anyway. Nobody answered. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then I checked my phone again, and that's when he messaged saying I had the wrong house. I scrolled up and looked, but it was the same address, exactly the same one he'd sent earlier. Something about that didn't sit right with me. I stood there for a second, looking back down at the message. I double-checked everything again. I replied saying that, and he came back with something like, "Oh crap, sorry, I copied the wrong one from my GPS. It's 2 blocks down." Then he sent a different house number. I figured maybe it was just a mistake, and I told myself not to overthink it. Then I walked back to my car and drove a bit further down the street. The new house looked about the same. It was just another townhouse with no lights on. I parked in front, but didn't get out right away. I wanted to be sure this wasn't a setup or something, so I stayed in the car for a minute or two and looked at the house. It was dark, but I thought I saw movement inside, like someone walking by one of the front windows. I couldn't make out anything clearly, it was just a shape. Then my phone buzzed again. Curtis said, "It's open, just come in." That was when I really started to feel like something wasn't right. I texted him back, asking why he wouldn't just open the door himself, but there was no reply. Just a minute later, another message came in. "Just come in, I'm in the back room, the door's unlocked." I didn't respond. I was sitting there thinking about what to do when the front door opened a little, and a guy stuck his head out. He looked straight at me and said, "You coming in?" But it wasn't Curtis. The guy was taller and had lighter hair. He looked older too, probably late 20s or early 30s. I stared at him, trying to figure out what was going on, and he just stood there waiting. I said, "Are you Curtis?" And he said, "Nah, he's in the back, just come in." He didn't seem nervous or anything, just very casual. That somehow seemed to make it worse. I didn't say anything else to him. I just turned around and walked straight back to my car. I locked the doors the second I got in and drove off. I didn't speed or make it dramatic. I just left. I didn't even look at my phone until I was halfway home. He had sent 3 messages already by then. The first one said, "That's my cousin, don't worry." The second one said, "Where'd you go?" And the third said, "Everything's fine, come back." I didn't answer any of them. It wasn't fine. None of that was normal. When I got home, I got in bed and stared at my phone for a while. More messages kept coming in from Curtis. He tried to act like it was all some mix-up, like I had overreacted, but he had never mentioned any cousin. He never said someone else would be there, and the whole thing about the wrong house didn't make sense. If I hadn't said anything, would he have just let me knock at the wrong door all night? I didn't respond to anything he sent that night, and there were maybe 10 or 11 messages in total by the time I finally turned off my phone. Some of them were trying to play it off like a joke. Some were kind of defensive, like I'd hurt his feelings by leaving, but I didn't care. The next morning, there were even more texts. One said something like, "You could have at least said goodbye," and another one said, "You're not even going to give me a chance to explain." I just stared at the screen for a second, and then closed the app. I didn't need to hear it. If he wanted to explain, he should have started with telling me that some random guy would be answering the door. That afternoon, he finally tried to give me some kind of explanation. He said the guy I saw was his cousin, who had come over randomly, and that they were just hanging out. He said it was totally safe, and I had nothing to worry about, but I didn't believe a word of it. He hadn't mentioned a cousin at all when we were planning to meet, not once. And it wasn't like the guy was just walking by in the background. He was the one who opened the door and told me to come in. A few days later, he was still messaging me, and the messages started getting more aggressive. He said I was being rude, then he accused me of lying about who I was. Then he said something like, "You're lucky I'm not the type to come find you." That one stuck with me. I remember reading it twice just to make sure I saw it right. I screenshotted everything and saved it. I never gave him my address, never sent any photos that showed landmarks or street signs or anything like that. The most he knew was the general area I lived in, which wasn't much to go on. Still, it was enough to make me feel weird for a few days. I kept checking over my shoulder when I went out. I didn't walk to the store like I usually did, and I stayed in more. Eventually, I sent one message to him. Just one. I said, "If you message me again, I'm going to file a police report. I already saved everything." I wanted to make it clear that I was done, and I wasn't playing around. After that, the messages stopped. I checked his profile a couple days later, and it was gone. Either he unmatched me or deleted his account. Either way, I was glad to see it gone. I blocked the number too, just in case. For a while, I kept wondering what would have happened if I had gone inside. I still think about that sometimes. Not constantly, but enough. I didn't tell my parents because they would have freaked out, but I did tell my friend everything the next day, and she was glad I left. She said she would have done the same thing, and we both agreed that we were done with Tinder for a while. Looking back, I don't think it was just bad communication or some weird coincidence. I think it was something I was lucky to walk away from. That was the last time I ever met up with someone I hadn't known for at least a few weeks first. I still talk to people online sometimes, but now I'm way more careful. When I was 23, I had just finished college and got a decent job as a supervisor at a call center. It wasn't my dream job or anything, and it wasn't really in my field, but it paid all right, and the people were decent. I was living in a rented townhouse with a friend from school named Amanda. She worked in marketing and had a long-distance boyfriend, so we mostly did our own thing, but split groceries and chores. It was a decent setup, and we lived in a quiet part of town, not fancy, but safe enough. I wasn't really dating seriously at the time, but every once in a while, I would swipe around on Tinder out of boredom. It had been over a year since I'd actually met anyone, but one night, I matched with a guy named Ryan. He was 28, worked in finance, and said he lived about 20 minutes away. We chatted for a few days before he asked if I wanted to get dinner. I said yes. He was even better looking in person than in his pictures, but shorter than I expected. He was maybe 5'8" or 5'9". He was well dressed and polite as well, maybe a little too polite, like there was no edge to him. He asked me a lot of questions, which was nice, but after a while, it started to feel off. It was like he was performing. He kept nodding at everything I said and agreeing with all of it, even dumb stuff like my take on pineapple on pizza. He didn't offer any of his own opinions unless I asked directly, and even then, it felt like he was trying too hard to give the right answer. At one point, I asked him what his favorite movie was, and he said, "What's yours?" I told him mine, and then he said, "That's one of my favorites too." I don't know, it just felt weird, and it was like he didn't have a real personality. Just a copy-paste of whatever he thought I wanted to hear. The rest of the day was okay, but I left feeling unsettled. Nothing bad had happened, and he didn't say anything inappropriate or act rude, but something about him felt fake. I wasn't sure if he was shy or awkward or trying to manipulate me. Either way, I knew I didn't want to go out with him again. The next morning, he texted me saying he had a great time and hoped to see me again. I waited a little while and then replied. I said thanks, but that I didn't feel a connection, and I wished him well. It was a normal message, polite and clear. He replied with, "Oh, okay, that's too bad." I didn't think much of it, but then a few hours later, he texted again, saying he'd really enjoyed our time, and asked if I was sure, but I didn't reply. The next day, he sent a longer message saying he felt like we had something special, and that I owed it to both of us to give it another chance. I didn't answer that one either. Amanda read the messages over my shoulder, and she thought it was creepy. At that point, I figured he would get bored and move on, because it wasn't like I'd let him on. We went on one date. I was polite and said no, so that should have been the end of it. I didn't block his number yet, mostly because I didn't think I'd need to. Instead, I just ignored the messages and hoped he'd get the hint, but over the next few days, they kept coming. It was nothing mean at first, just clingy and kind of desperate. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I told myself he'd give up soon. The text didn't stop though. Every morning there'd be something new. At first it was just hey, or questions like, have you changed your mind yet? But after a week or so, they got longer. He sent entire paragraphs about how he hadn't felt a connection like this in years, how he thought I was different, and how it was unfair to throw it away after one night. I didn't reply to any of it, which only seemed to make him try harder. He hadn't threatened me or anything like that, but it was enough to make me feel on edge. I showed Amanda some of the longer texts, and she told me to block him. I said I was thinking about it, but didn't want to set him off. She said that was a bad excuse, and I needed to take it seriously. Around that time, I started feeling nervous walking home from the bus stop. I hadn't told him my address, but I knew it wouldn't be that hard to find. My Instagram had pictures tagged at our house, and I hadn't said anything to private, because I just never thought I needed to. I sent one last message telling him again that I wasn't interested, and that I didn't want any more contact. He didn't respond to that one, but the next day I got a 5-paragraph essay about how he was hurt and disappointed, and couldn't believe I was treating him like this. He said I was leading him on, and that I must be heartless to throw away a good man like him. That was when I stopped trying to be nice. I blocked his number and locked down my social media. Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. I told Amanda what I'd done, and she agreed it was the right move. Things were quiet after that for a while. A few weeks went by, and I figured it was over. I went back to using Instagram a little, just to post some photos and check in with people. Nothing public, just small stuff. I didn't hear from Ryan again after that, so I started to relax. Amanda said I'd probably scared him off by not feeding into his drama, and I figured she was right. Then, one Friday night, I was home alone because Amanda had gone to see her boyfriend for the weekend. I was in pajamas watching a show when someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was a little worried. I paused the TV and walked over slowly. The porch light was on, but the window by the door didn't give a great view. I peeked out, and there was a man standing there. I couldn't see his face clearly at first, but something about him looked familiar. I moved closer to the front window and looked out. That's when he saw me, and it was Ryan. The second we made eye contact, he stepped closer to the door and said something I couldn't hear. Then he raised his voice and said, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond, and I backed away from the window. And that's when he started pounding on the door. He wasn't yelling or threatening, just saying things like, "Come on, just talk to me," over and over, but louder each time. I shouted through the door that I was calling the police. I don't know if he believed me, but I meant it. I grabbed my phone, went to my room, locked the door, and dialed 911. I told the person that a man I'd gone on one date with was now on my porch and wouldn't leave. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me while the officers were sent out. Ryan kept banging on the door for what felt like forever, but I didn't look again. I stayed in my room with the door locked until I finally saw the cop cars coming. Eventually, the pounding stopped and I peeked out my bedroom window. 2 officers were out front talking to him. He wasn't resisting or yelling. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets like none of this was strange. After a while, one of the officers came to talk to me, and he asked if I knew the man out front. I said yes, and that we went on one date, but I'd blocked him after he started harassing me. The officer then said that he told them that you were his girlfriend, and you locked him out after an argument. I just stared at him and said, "What?" He told them that we lived here together, got into a fight, and that I locked him out. I told the officer that was completely false. By the time they finished, Ryan was gone. I wasn't sure if they let him walk away, or if they drove him somewhere else, but either way, he was no longer out front. The officer told me to file a report if I wanted to press charges, or get a restraining order. I said I'd think about it, but I just wanted to sleep. He gave me a number to call, and told me to stay safe. That night after I locked the door, I pushed a chair in front of it, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. Amanda came home on Sunday night, and when I told her everything, she was furious and freaked out on my behalf. I did end up filing a report, but I never saw Ryan again. I stayed off social media for a long time after that, and even now, I still check the peephole every time someone knocks. I'm Ashley, and I had just turned 30 when this happened. I was single and living in a mid-sized city. I was working from home most days and trying to be open to meeting new people. I had been on Hinge for a few weeks, mostly matching with guys who couldn't hold a conversation or didn't seem to have much going on, but then I matched with Casey. He was 36, and he had a few photos that looked like they were taken by someone else, no selfies. None of them were overly posed, just him outside at what looked like a winery or maybe a family event. He had dark hair, a clean beard, and he was pretty good looking overall. Something about the way he looked in his pictures made him seem well put together. We started chatting, and I liked that he used full sentences and didn't just say hey or comment on my looks. He asked about what I did for work, where I grew up, that kind of thing. He said he worked in finance but was thinking of switching fields because he was getting burned out. We messaged back and forth for a day or two, and the conversation felt good. I didn't feel rushed or pushed into anything, which was nice. Then he asked if I wanted to come over to his place for dinner. I told him I wasn't comfortable going to someone's apartment on a first date. I didn't say it in a rude way, just something like, I'd rather meet in public first if that's okay. He said he understood, and suggested we meet at a park near the downtown area of our city. It was a well-known public place, not too big, but it had benches, a couple walking paths, and it was next to a busy street. I looked it up online, and checked a few pictures, and it seemed fine. I asked if 7 p.m. worked, and he said yes. I told a friend where I was going, and made sure my phone was fully charged. I didn't dress up too much, just jeans and a fitted sweater with ankle boots. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but I also didn't want to show up looking like I just rolled out of bed. It had been a while since I felt nervous about a date, but something about meeting someone in a park made me feel a little cautious. It was a public area though, and it wasn't like we were meeting in the woods. The plan was just to walk and talk, maybe grab a coffee after if it went well. I left the house at around 6:30 and parked near the main entrance by 6:50. The sun was starting to go down, but it wasn't dark yet. There were a few people walking their dogs, and I saw a group of teenagers who looked like wannabe gangsters, but I thought they were probably harmless. It didn't feel dangerous at all. I found a bench near the front gate and sat down to wait. I checked my phone just to confirm the time from the messages. The last one from him said, "See you at 7, so I knew I had it right. I put my phone in my jacket pocket and looked around every so often. I kept glancing at my phone as the minutes ticked past 7 o'clock. A few people walked by here and there. There was an older couple with a dog, a guy jogging, a woman on the phone, but no one looked like Casey, not even close. I stayed on the bench trying not to get impatient, and then at around 7:10, I told myself maybe he was just stuck in traffic or parking. The streets nearby could be busy around that time. At 7:15, I started to feel stupid sitting there. I checked his profile again, and we were still matched. I scrolled through our messages one more time to make sure I hadn't misread anything. There was one man I noticed near a path to the right of the bench. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, and he wasn't facing me, but kept glancing around like he was waiting too. He didn't look like the guy in the photos, though. He was older, had a different build, and he had a beard that was longer than Casey's. I figured he was just another person there, maybe waiting for someone else, or just hanging out. He never got too close, but I still noticed him more than once. I didn't want to message Casey too soon and seem needy, but at 7:30, I finally opened the app and typed, "Hey, are you still coming?" Then I put my phone away and waited a few more minutes, but there was no response. I watched the screen for that little typing icon thing to pop up, but it didn't. I refreshed the app, but there was still nothing. By 7:40, I was annoyed more than anything. I'd taken the time to show up, be on time, and he hadn't even bothered to say he'd be late. I stood up, brushed some leaves off my jeans, and started walking back towards the street where I had parked. I told myself maybe he'd text later with an apology or excuse, but at that point, I didn't really care. It just felt like a waste of time. As I started walking back to my car, I noticed the same man from earlier start walking too, and he was behind me. He wasn't rushing, and he didn't seem like he was directly following me, but it was enough to make me a little uncomfortable. I kept walking anyway, and didn't look back too obviously. When I crossed the street, so did he, but I turned left toward the lot where I parked, and after about a block, I looked back again. He was still there. I kept going, and he didn't close the distance, but he didn't fall behind either. It was hard to tell if he just happened to be going the same way, but it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. By the time I reached the sidewalk leading into the lot, I felt like I needed to make a decision. I grabbed my keys out of my pocket and kept them in my hand. I wasn't panicking, but I was definitely alert. As I stepped off the curb and into the lot, I could hear someone getting close to me. I looked over my shoulder and saw him running, full on running straight toward me. My car was about 30 feet away, and I sprinted straight for it. I unlocked it with the fob, yanked the door open, and got in fast. I slammed the lock button and shoved the key into the ignition, then turned the engine on and hit reverse without even checking my mirrors. He reached my car just as I started backing up. He didn't bang on the window or try to open the door, but he came right up to it, then stopped and backed away when he realized he was too late. I pulled out of the lot fast and drove straight towards a main road. I didn't look back again until I was a few blocks away, and when I did, there was no sign of him, just regular traffic and people walking around like nothing happened. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a minute with the doors still locked. My hands were still shaky, but I managed to check my phone again, and there was still no response from Casey. I went back to the Hinge app, and his profile was still there. By then, I was pretty sure he had set me up, and the profile was probably fake. I hit the block button and reported the account. It was probably pointless, but I didn't know what else to do. I never heard from him again, and I checked the app once or twice over the next few days, but the match was gone. Either he unmatched me, or Hinge took down the profile after I reported it. I don't know for sure what happened, and I didn't try to dig into it. I just wanted to be done with the whole thing. After that, I stopped using dating apps for a while. Not because I was scared all the time, but because I felt stupid for letting my guard down. I kept telling myself I had done everything right. I picked a public place, and even told someone where I was going, but it still almost went bad. I met a girl named Sasha on a dating app last year when I was 24 and she was the same age. We started texting back and forth, and after a few days, we decided to meet up for dinner. She picked the place, which was a decent restaurant downtown. I got there about 10 minutes early and sat near the bar, but I was nervous. I kept checking the door every time it opened. She showed up right on time, and she looked even better in person, which made me even more self-conscious. She was the kind of person people turned to look at when she walked in, and I'm just some average chump. The first few minutes were a little awkward, like most first dates. We went through the usual small talk, where we were from, what we did for work, what kind of stuff we liked. She was polite and friendly, but I could tell she wasn't really excited. I tried to stay relaxed and not overthink everything I said, but it was hard. I felt like I was trying too hard and still somehow messing it up. She ordered a drink and I got one too, but after her second, she glanced at her phone and said she had to get going. It wasn't rude or abrupt, but I was kind of surprised. She thanked me for dinner and said she had fun, but it felt like a lie. We hugged before she left, and I watched her walk out of the restaurant without looking back. I paid the check and sat there for a minute before heading out. I wasn't crushed, but I was disappointed. I knew I probably wasn't going to hear from her again, and I figured she just wasn't that interested. I couldn't really blame her either, because she was out of my league, and it kind of felt like she realized that halfway through the date. However, the next day I decided to text her and shoot my shot. I didn't expect anything, but I figured it was worth a try. I just said that I had a nice time, and asked if she wanted to meet up again. She didn't respond, which I took as confirmation, and I told myself to move on. But a few days later, out of nowhere, she texted back. She asked if I wanted to grab drinks that night. I was surprised, but said yes, and she told me where to meet her. It was a bar I'd been to before, and it was not far from where we'd had dinner. I got there about 5 minutes early, and grabbed a table near the front window so I could see when she showed up. Right on time, I saw her walking up, but she wasn't alone. There was a guy with her. They were talking as they came down the sidewalk, but I couldn't hear them from inside. When they got to the entrance, he gave her a hug, said something to her, and walked off. Then she came inside like nothing was weird. I stood up when she came in and gave her a small wave, then she smiled and walked over. I didn't ask about the guy, and she didn't mention him. I figured if she wanted to tell me who he was, she would. People are allowed to have friends after all, and I tried not to read into it. We ordered drinks and started talking again. This time I was more relaxed, because I honestly didn't think I had a shot, so I wasn't trying as hard. She laughed at a few things I said, and seemed more comfortable too. The conversation just felt easier. By the time we left, I felt better about things, but I still didn't know where I stood. I didn't hear from Sasha the next day, but I wasn't too bothered. I figured she'd text if she felt like it. Then a few nights later, I got a message from her out of nowhere. It was close to 12:30 in the morning, and just said, "Hey, are you up?" I said yeah, and she responded almost right away. She said she went out with some friends, had too much to drink, and now they'd left without her. She asked if I could come get her because she didn't feel safe taking an Uber. I thought it was a little weird that I was the one she would call, but it was a good sign for me. Also, she sounded like she needed help, and I didn't want her to get in a car with some random driver if she was drunk. She sent me her location, and it was behind a row of apartment buildings near a strip mall. I didn't know the area well, but I figured I could find it, so I grabbed my keys and got in the car. When I pulled up, it was even darker than I expected. There weren't any working streetlights, just a few dim bulbs near the back doors of the buildings. I parked in the spot she marked and texted her that I was there, but I didn't get a response. I waited a few minutes and then sent another text. Then 2 guys came running out from between the buildings. One went for my door and started yanking the handle, while the other one ran around to the passenger side and hit the back window with something. I slammed the gas and got out of there, but one of them hit the side of my car with something as I sped off. I didn't stop until I was at least 5 blocks away. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat there, trying to catch my breath. I checked the damage to my car, and there was a long scratch down the side and a dent near the back, but it could have been a lot worse. I tried calling Sasha again, thinking maybe she really had been in trouble, and these guys just happened to be there, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent another text asking if she was okay, but she never answered. I ended up calling the police, not 911, just the non-emergency line. I explained what happened, and said I was worried that someone might be in trouble. They said they'd send an officer to check out the area, and asked me to stay on the line while they got details. About 20 minutes later, they called me back and said they didn't find anything. No woman matching Sasha's description, no sign of any kind of disturbance, and the alley was empty. That's when I started to feel sick to my stomach. I opened up her message thread and tried to call again, but got the same voicemail. Then I went to her profile on the dating app, but it was gone. That's when I realized for sure that she set me up. I stayed parked in that gas station lot for a long time, trying to calm down. I wasn't physically hurt, but I felt like an idiot. I'd driven across town to pick up someone I barely knew, and she'd lured me into a setup like it was nothing. I didn't even know what to do. I called the police back and asked if I should file a report, but they said without any actual damage to me or a way to identify the suspects, there wasn't much they could do. They took a note of it and told me to let them know if anything else happened. The next morning, I took the car to a shop. The damage wasn't bad, it was just cosmetic, but it still cost a few hundred to fix. I paid out of pocket because I didn't feel like explaining the story to my insurance. It was embarrassing enough already. I kept thinking through every conversation I'd had with her because I was trying to figure out if there were any red flags I missed, but there really weren't. She didn't ask for money and didn't come on too strong. I deleted the dating app that night because I needed a break from all of it. I didn't stop dating entirely, but I definitely started being more cautious. I didn't pick anyone up unless I'd known them for a while, and I didn't go anywhere sketchy, no matter the reason. Every now and then, I still think about her. I wonder if she's pulled the same thing on other guys, or if I was just a one-off. I don't even know if Sasha was her real name, and I'll probably never find out. This story is about a relationship that I had about 10 years ago, when I was around 25. I had met a girl through my friends, and we really hit it off. Her name was Katie, and we had a lot in common, so it wasn't long before we started dating. Things were going really well at first, and it wasn't long before she was staying over at my place, a few nights per week. I had a one-bedroom apartment on the 12th floor of a really nice building. It was a little out of my price range, but I managed to keep up with the rent by cutting other expenses. Having a nice place is and was really important to me. It would also be a little embarrassing to bring a girl to a hole-in-the-wall apartment like I had before this place. On the 4th or 5th time she stayed over, I woke up in the middle of the night with an anxious feeling. I felt like I was being watched, but I sat up and looked around, and there was nothing there. I slumped down against the headboard of my bed and looked down at Katie, who was fast asleep. I figured that it must have been a bad dream that I couldn't remember. I would get those sometimes. I would feel all the anxiety from a terrible dream, but have no memory of what actually happened. It's a weird feeling, but I didn't worry about it at the time. Another time when Katie was over, I woke up again with the same feeling, but this time, as soon as I opened my eyes, I could see Katie's face in front of mine. I jumped from shock. Her normally pretty face was surprisingly creepy in the dark. The only source of light was a slight glow from the open window, but as soon as I realized it was her, I calmed down. "Whoa, you scared me," I whispered. She didn't speak. She just stayed still, leaned over staring at me. I don't think I saw so much as a blink. After an awkward 10 or 15 seconds, I placed my hands on her shoulders and gently laid her back down on her side of the bed. Then I went back to sleep. The next morning, I brought it up while we were eating breakfast. As we sat at my kitchen table, I told her that I woke up and she was staring at me, her eyes wide open, but she insisted that it never happened. Not that she didn't remember, but that it didn't happen, and she was really quite defensive about it. I decided not to push the issue any further, although I knew that it did happen. At the time, I believed that she was probably sleepwalking, and that she was sensitive about it. I figured it was not worth it to convince her that I was right. However, I was still creeped out, because I thought that sleepwalkers had closed eyes. I googled it later though, and found out that eyes are often open for sleepwalkers, so maybe it was that. Nothing happened for the next several weeks, and other than this incident, the relationship was really going great. We had a number of fantastic group dates with our mutual friends, and things were progressing very quickly. We even started to discuss our future together. I would come to a halt very soon, though. It was a night like any other at my apartment. We cooked dinner together like usual, then watched a movie on the couch and went to bed at around midnight. I awoke again in the middle of the night with that same feeling of anxiety. When I opened my eyes, Katie was not facing me like before. I immediately looked to her side of the bed, but she was gone. I was confused for 2 or 3 seconds until I looked forward. Katie was standing in front of my bed, the open doorway behind her. Her long black hair covered most of her face, but I could see her wide open eyes looking at me, a blank expression on her face. I blinked a few times while my eyes were adjusting, and when I did, I noticed something terrifying. In her right hand, she was holding the large chef's knife from my kitchen. "Katie, what are you doing?" I asked. She just stood there swaying. A creepy smile slowly appeared on her face. With that, I had seen enough. I quickly threw on some clothes and got out of there. I had to pass right by Katie with the knife in order to get out of the room, but she didn't make a move. She just stood there and let me leave. I slept in my car that night, and the next day, I broke up with her over the phone. Again, she insisted that nothing happened, and even accused me of making it up to get out of the relationship. That was the furthest thing from the truth. To make matters worse, she convinced all of our mutual friends that I was making it up, and they all took her side. I went my own way and made new friends after that. I didn't talk to any of them for years after that. However, I did find out through Facebook that Katie began dating our friend Andrew after this incident. I hadn't heard anything about them in years until I ran into Stephanie at the grocery store. It had been a long time since the incident, so it was all water under the bridge to me. When I locked eyes with Stephanie, it seemed like she'd seen a ghost. I started walking over to her smiling, but her face looked frightened and timid. I figured that she thought I'd be mad, so I walked over to her and gave her a big hug to show her that there were no hard feelings. It didn't seem to work though, because as soon as I let her go, I noticed that she was crying. I stood there confused for a few seconds, then I led her outside to the parking lot so we could have a little more privacy. She eventually calmed down, and when she did, I found out why she was crying. She told me that shortly after Katie and Andrew started dating, Katie had stabbed Andrew to death in his sleep. Stephanie gushed for several minutes about how I was right and about how wrong everyone was for doubting me. How if only they had listened to me, then Katie may have gotten the help she needed before it was too late. This incident is something that will stay with me forever. Although I tried to say something at the time, not a day goes by that I don't feel guilty for not doing more. I let the issue go and moved on with my life, a luxury that Andrew will never have. I met a guy named Andre on a dating app a few years ago. I am 30 now, but I was 26 or 27 back then. Andre was 24. He was very handsome with a great sense of style, straight teeth, and intense eyes. I was immediately attracted to him. Right off the bat, though, I noticed that I was doing all of the work and carrying on the conversation on the app. That was unusual for me, since usually the guy takes the lead, but I kept talking to him anyway. Eventually we met, and the first date went really well. I could tell, though, that Andre was really a shy and awkward guy. I was really responsible for driving the conversation, and after we started dating, I was completely planning all of the dates. He would never text me first, and I was always the one taking the lead. I was doing really well in my career at the time, and I had recently bought my first place, a small 2-bedroom detached house with a single story. Andre, on the other hand, was not as established. He still lived with roommates. Because of that, the dynamic in the relationship kind of felt like mother-son to some extent. Not exactly what I was looking for. On a positive note, he was really great with my dog Beefcake, who is a purebred English bulldog. I think a great judge of character for a person is how they interact with animals. There's something that animals can sense in people that other humans can't. That doesn't mean that they can't be wrong sometimes, though, and this time, my dog was definitely wrong. We had been seeing each other for a few months when I decided to end things. I was feeling unappreciated because he was really not pulling his weight in the relationship. I also sensed a certain level of apathy from Andre, like he didn't really care if we were together or not. That's why I broke up with him. We met at a park near my house and sat down at a park bench. I made some small talk first, then I broke the news to him. When I did that, I was shocked by his reaction. He immediately burst out crying like a baby. His face turned beet red as large tears poured from his eyes. His nose was running, and every few seconds he would make a loud snorting noise. I was expecting the feeling to be mutual, for the reasons I described. It seemed that the relationship was not working on either end, so I was surprised that he reacted the way he did. We sat there for several minutes while Andre sobbed and begged me to reconsider. That only further cemented my decision. I was done with him, or so I thought. I had moved on and even went on a few dates. Nothing really worked out, though. After a few weeks, I started getting calls from Andre. He would call me late at night, often crying and begging me for another chance. This guy really didn't have control over his emotions, and with every call, I became more and more repulsed by him. I eventually told him to stop calling me. Then I blocked his number and deleted him from all social media. A few more weeks went by, and I thought the whole thing was over. Unfortunately, I was very wrong. One Sunday afternoon, I was alone at home, and Andre showed up. He rang my doorbell first, but I tried to pretend that I was not home. I had security cameras covering my porch and backyard, so I watched him on my computer screen as he stood there. He gave up ringing after a while, but he didn't leave. I zoomed in on his face, which had a lifeless expression. He wasn't crying or anything, just a stone-cold frown. After a few more minutes, I walked to my front door where Andre was waiting on the other side. I said, "Go away, Andre, or I'm calling the police." He didn't reply. Then I went back to my computer to watch him on the camera. He looked up at the camera once, then he started pounding on the door with his shoulder. That was when I decided to call the police. I had no choice. Andre was arrested that day. He spent a few days in jail, but to my horror, he was granted bail. I didn't sleep the night when he was released. Ever since that incident, I had my brother stay over at my house. A few weeks went by with no further trouble, so I thought it might be over, but it wasn't. I woke up one Saturday morning at 6 a.m. and let Beefcake out into the backyard. Then I went for a run. When I came back, Beefcake was gone. At first I figured that he must have squeezed through the wooden fence somehow, so I jogged around the neighborhood looking for him. He wasn't the fastest runner, so he couldn't have gotten far, I thought. After a few hours, I decided to take a break. Like I said, I had a security camera covering the backyard, so I took a look at the footage to see if I could find out which way he went. When I watched it, however, I saw something terrifying. Caught on camera was Andre climbing my fence. Once he was inside, he took Beefcake by the collar and led him through the gate and closed it behind them. That guy stole my dog. I immediately called the police and reported it to them. Andre was quickly arrested again, this time for kidnapping my dog, but the police were not able to get him talking. He wouldn't say a word, and he never told anybody what happened to my dog. Like I said, the one redeeming quality of Andre's was that he was really good with the dog, so I like to tell myself that there's no way that he would hurt him. I only hope that he had the decency to find a good home for him, but that's far from certain. I broke up with my girlfriend Susan last year. We had only been dating for a few months, but even in that amount of time, there were a number of red flags which were the reason I decided to end things. One time I caught her looking through my phone even though it was locked with a password. I figured that she must have looked when I was entering at one time, and remembered it so she could unlock my phone later. Also, some of my friends would say that she would ask them some really strange questions about me. Things like where I was and what I was doing on particular days. These incidents, among others, were the reason that I decided to end the relationship. When I told her, she didn't scream or cry or anything like that. There was just this cold look in her eyes, like she was staring daggers at me. It was a really creepy thing, but I figured it would pass, so I moved on with my life. I had an apartment to myself at the time. It was on the second floor of an older apartment building. It was 3 floors total and made of red brick. I would guess that it was at least 100 years old, and it was just outside of the downtown area. There was an older intercom system that people could use to buzz guests in. I think that part was from the 90s or something, because it didn't connect to our phones like the newer ones. It was a speaker box on the wall. Even though you weren't supposed to let random people in, most of my neighbors would just buzz anyone up who rang. A few weeks after the breakup, I started to get a strange feeling in my apartment. It was like there were things in there that were out of place. I'm a very tidy and organized person, so if something's wrong, I notice it right away. It was mostly small things, like the door to my bedroom was open, even though I always close it. And even smaller things like that, my towel in the bathroom was shifted over slightly on the towel rack. I know it sounds minuscule, but I really pay attention to stuff like that, and it was making me feel uneasy. Obviously my mind went to Susan, but I didn't think it was her since I never gave her a key to my apartment. So even though she could have gotten into the building through the outdated buzzer system, I didn't think she could get into my place. Also, the second floor window was really hard to get to. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, and didn't worry about it for a while. Things kept happening though, that had me worried. I started to notice articles of clothing were missing, and not just a sock that could have been lost in the laundry. My favorite pair of blue jeans were gone. I also noticed that my bed, which is always made tidily, was looking like a mess. Like someone had unmade it, then haphazardly tossed the duvet somewhat back in place. I knew for a fact that I would not have left it like that, so I was starting to feel seriously worried. One night, I came home late from a night out with friends, and as soon as I stepped into my apartment, everything felt off. I turned on the lights and stood in the doorway for a few seconds looking around. I felt a presence in that place, but nobody was there. I took a deep breath, then said, "Hello," but there was no answer. Then I took off my shoes and started cautiously making my way through my apartment. I checked the living room and kitchen, which were actually the same room. Then I poked my head into the bathroom and turned on the light. There was nobody there. Finally, I stepped into the bedroom and also turned on that light. It seemed to be empty as well. I bent down and looked under my bed, and the coast was clear. I was beginning to feel relieved at this point, but I did have a closet in the bedroom, and I knew that was the last place that anybody could be hiding. So I walked slowly to the closet door and took one final look around before opening it. I reached for the handle and slid the door to the side. When I looked down, Susan was sitting there with that same cold expression on her face that I saw when we broke up. She had been sneaking into the apartment all this time. Although I was extremely terrified, I was also relieved there was finally an explanation for the strange things that had been happening. I immediately closed the closet and ran out of my apartment and down the street, then called 911. The police came and arrested Susan, who was still there when they arrived. After a few hours of interrogation, the police discovered that Susan had managed to make a copy of my keys at some point while we were together. I tried, but I couldn't think of a time when she would have had access to them for long enough to make copies. That was especially creepy to me, because it shows that she was planning something like this before we even broke up. She was never charged legally, but she was ordered by the court to attend therapy, and a restraining order was placed against her as well. After that, I moved out of that apartment and back in with my parents who live in a different city. I haven't heard from her since, and I haven't tried to find out anything about her or her progress in therapy. Although this was the worst experience of my life, I actually do wish the best for her. I broke up with my girlfriend after 6 months of dating. Her name was Jillian. We met through Tinder, which is usually a bit of a red flag, but at first everything was fine. She was easy to talk to, funny in her own way, and we liked a lot of the same things. There was some common ground on movies, music, and other stuff. But after a while, I started feeling weird about it. She got clingy fast and always wanted to be in constant contact. She texted me first thing in the morning and kept messaging all day. If I didn't respond within 10 minutes, she'd double text, sometimes triple. At first I brushed it off, but it started to wear me down. I waited longer than I probably should have to break up with her, and I didn't think she'd handle it well. The few times we'd talked about exes, she described them in ways that made me nervous, like they were all either villains or cowards. That's why I planned it carefully. I decided to do it at her place, figuring it would be easier to leave if things got weird. I sat her down and told her I didn't think it was working anymore. I said I needed more space, and that I didn't feel like I was the right person for her long term. I expected tears or maybe shouting, but instead, she just sat there quietly and nodded. She asked a few questions, but didn't push. Then she walked me to the door and said she hoped we could stay friends. I was honestly surprised, because I thought it was going to be ugly, but she seemed calm about it. I still walked back to my car kind of tense, because I was expecting her to text me something angry once I drove off, but she didn't. She didn't message me for several days, and when she did reach out, it was casual stuff. She sent some memes, little updates, but nothing intense. I figured maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she just took it better than I thought she would. A few weeks went by, and I got busy with work and tried not to think too hard about dating again. Then Jillian texted and said she wanted to hang out, just as friends. She asked if I wanted to come by for a drink and catch up. She said she understood if it was weird and told me I could say no. I ended up saying yes because it seemed really casual. I thought it might help things feel more normal between us, and I didn't want to be cold for no reason. When I got to her place, she was in a good mood. She gave me a hug, offered me a drink, and we sat in the living room for a bit. It was vodka and orange juice, I think. She handed it to me in a big glass and said she'd already had one herself. I took a few sips while she talked about her job and some family stuff. Then things started to feel strange and the room got hazy. I tried to stand up, but my legs were heavy. That's the last thing I remember before blacking out. When I woke up, I was tied to a rolling desk chair, the kind with armrests and a high back. It was in her bedroom, right in front of her computer. My wrists were duct taped to the armrests, and my ankles were tied to the legs of the chair. At first I thought maybe I was dreaming or hallucinating, but I blinked a few times, and everything stayed the same. The lights were low in the room, and there was music playing from her speakers. It was some playlist with slow indie songs. I looked over, and Jillian was sitting on the bed, scrolling on her phone. When I moved, she looked up and said, "Oh good, you're up." I asked her what was going on. My mouth was dry, and my head felt like it was filled with cotton. She didn't answer me directly. She just said, You look tired. I thought you could use a nap. I told her to let me go and tried to sound calm about it, but she just shook her head. I just want to talk, she said. You never really gave me closure. I tried to play along and told her I'd been thinking about her and that maybe I made a mistake by breaking up. I asked her if we could talk things through after she let me go, but she didn't believe me. She stared at me for a long time and then said, "That's not how you talk when you mean something." Then she got up and walked over to me. I didn't know what she was going to do, but she just looked me over and said, "You're not a good liar." Then she sat back down and opened her laptop. She didn't do anything violent, and she didn't threaten me. She just kept me there and kept talking. She rambled about how hard the breakup had been, and how I didn't understand what she was going through. I kept trying to be understanding, even though I was really mad. I kept saying that I understood, and tried not to upset her. I wasn't sure if she'd drugged me with something, or just spiked the drink enough to knock me out, but my head still felt off. This went on for a while. I don't know how long exactly, but at least an hour, maybe more. She'd get quiet for a while, then start talking again. Sometimes she'd laugh at something she remembered, like it was a normal night. I kept trying to act like I cared, hoping she'd decide to trust me. But every time I tried to steer the conversation toward leaving or undoing the tape, she shut it down. Eventually, I heard footsteps outside in the hallway. Someone was walking past her apartment, maybe heading toward another unit, so I started yelling. Not screaming frantically, but loud enough that someone in the hall might hear. I yelled her name a few times, then just started shouting, "Help," over and over. Jillian jumped up immediately and rushed over to cover my mouth with her hand. She looked panicked for the first time. "Are you crazy?" she whispered. I kept yelling, even with her hand trying to muffle it. I moved around in the chair to make it louder, hoping the sound would carry through the door. I don't know if the person was listening, but I didn't stop. Jillian looked toward the front of her apartment, then back at me. A second later, she sighed and said, Okay, fine." She went to her closet, pulled out a pair of scissors, and cut the tape off of my arms. I just stood up slowly, watching her. She was breathing hard and pacing a little. "I was just messing with you," she said, forcing an awkward laugh. But I didn't believe her, and she knew I didn't. My arms hurt from being taped down for so long, so I moved them around to get the blood flowing. "I thought you'd think it was funny," she said. I walked past her without responding, then went straight to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty, so whoever had been walking by earlier was gone. I left without saying anything else, and she didn't follow me. When I got to my car, I sat there for a minute. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't. I didn't know what I'd even say. I knew she would deny it, and there were no marks on me, so I didn't want to drag it out any more than it had already had been. I went home and blocked her number that night. She tried to message me from another account a few days later, but I blocked that too. I didn't tell many people what happened, just one close friend, and even then, I kept the details light. I still think about it sometimes, not every day, but enough. I haven't been in a real relationship since. It's not that I'm scared of dating, but I'm more careful now and probably have some trust issues. I was a new student at a small school in November of 2017. The size was around 50 kids in total. The reason I went there was because the things I was learning in my old school were way too advanced for me. I had to transition to a school where the work was way easier and where I could focus better. It's called the Smith School, and it's based in New York City. It used to be a school for kids who had a criminal history, but now it's changed to a place for kids who have special needs. I was there for almost a full year, and then I transferred into a bigger school. I was pretty much friends with everyone there because the school was so small. I even ended up dating a guy, and his name was Kyle Fernandez. I started dating him in February or March of 2018. The reason why he went to the Smith School was because he got kicked out from his previous school for selling weed to other students, and one person ended up telling on him. For the first 2 or 3 months of dating him, he was nice to me and to the people that went to our school, but at the same time he was also high on drugs most of the time. I never smoked weed, and I never will. Kyle would also take me to hang out with his other friends outside of school. They were also a lot like him. They were always smoking and selling weed. Also, they had their pants sagging, which would reveal their underwear. It was so eye-burning to see that crap, but Kyle loved me and I loved him. When Kyle and his friends did stuff that would get them in trouble, I would stay out of it, and thankfully, Kyle never pressured me to join them. A few more months went by, and our relationship stayed the same until one day in July. Kyle came over to my place at night. For an hour, we were just chatting in my bedroom until my phone started going off. It was a bunch of text messages from my friend Liam. I opened them, and I saw that he sent me a bunch of edgy but funny memes. I started laughing hard, and Kyle then asked me who was texting. I told him that it was my friend Liam. He then asked if he could see the texts. I then responded saying, "Please, it's really nothing. He's a longtime friend who makes me laugh all the time." Kyle then got really upset with me and demanded a look at my phone. My smile faded away, and I felt a little skittish. I then muttered the word, "No." Then he grabbed my phone and threw it at the wall. It hit a lamp and glass went everywhere. On the floor, the top of my drawer, and on my bed. I was in disbelief at what just happened. As a reaction to what Kyle just did, I put my arms up to my face because I didn't know what he would do next. I then felt his hand grab my left arm, and he did something that made me change how I saw him as a person. I saw glass in his hand, and before I could even say anything or move, Kyle plunged it into my arm so fast, and then took it out 2 seconds later. I screamed so loud that Africa could probably hear me. As I was still screaming, Kyle then yelled at me, "You happy now?" Then he ran out of my room and out of my apartment. I really wish my mother was home, but of course she wasn't. I then ran right to my bathroom and washed the stab wound with soap and water. It was hurting like hell when I did that. I then got a humongous bandage and put it on my left arm. After doing that, I went back to my phone, took the shattered screen protector off, and proceeded to block Kyle on everything. If he tried to come and see me again, I'd make it clear that I never wanted to see him. To my shock, he never came to my house, and I never saw him on the streets again. I kept what Kyle did to me a secret, and when anyone asked me what happened between us, I just said that our relationship was not going in the right direction. Everyone actually seemed to believe me. I didn't let anybody know what the real reason was because I was just too scared. But then something happened in the summer of 2023. It was early August, and I was at work that day. Suddenly, I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I took it out to see who was calling me, and it was a number starting with 212. For people that don't know, 212 is an area code that's from New York City. I was curious to see who was calling me, so I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" I heard a woman on the line asking if this was me. I replied back saying, "Yeah, that's me. Who's this?" I then heard the woman say, "This is the 42nd Street New York Presbyterian Hospital calling, and I'm here to inform you that your mother, along with 10 people, have been hit by a car, and she's in critical condition." As I heard this, I felt my hand shaking while holding the phone. I tried staying composed and said, "I'll be there right away." I ran out of my workplace really fast, without telling anyone where I was going or what happened. I got to the hospital in about 10 or 15 minutes. I asked where my mom was, and a woman at the front desk said that she was in a room right down the hall. I ran over to that room, and when I got there, I saw that she was in a coma. I sat down next to her crying like I'd never cried before. A nurse came in, and I asked her for the details of the incident. The nurse said that a man stole a car while intoxicated and drove on the wrong side of the street. Then he went onto a sidewalk and hit a cyclist, your mom, and 5 others. I was so taken aback hearing this that I asked if they found out the guy's name yet. The nurse said, "We don't know yet, but we'll probably get an answer tomorrow." The next day came, and there was both amazing and terrible news. I'll start off with the good news. The good news was that my mom woke up. The bad news was that the person who drove the vehicle was Kyle. I was in such disbelief. I really wanted to make sure that he would not get away with this. Thank God he got tackled by good Samaritans on the street and that the police had him in custody. I wanted to scream so badly, but I would just be humiliating myself by doing that. Another part about the bad news is that a couple of days later, I would find out that my mother would never be able to walk again. I felt as if my life was over. When this news story broke out all around the country, everyone thought this was a terrorist attack. I wrote a letter to the court about the time he assaulted me with the shattered glass. After this was read out in court, another woman who Kyle dated in 2022 came forward about how she was also a victim of Kyle. This warmed my heart because she felt inspired to tell her story as well. In the end, Kyle was found guilty and he was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars, but that sentence is way too short. It should have been 20 years because of the 7 victims he unintentionally hit with his car. Most of them were left with lifetime injuries. He must have hired an amazing lawyer to get such a short sentence. I have nothing but hatred for Kyle, now after what he did to my mother. People like him never change. I know I might be taking things out of proportion, but I'm never going to get over this. While Kyle's serving his time in prison, I hope he reflects on his actions and changes as a person. My advice to him is that he should move out of New York City and start a new life. If anyone's interested, there's a video of Kyle getting tackled online, and it went viral. The video shows Kyle getting taken down by 3 men and being confronted for what he did. He would later deny that he did it, which shows that he's a liar and has no remorse for what he did. For the people living in New York City, when Kyle gets out of prison and you see him on the street, avoid him at all costs because you don't want to be his next victim. I met a guy named Adam on a dating app in early spring last year. His profile looked normal and well put together. He said he was 39, had never been married, had no kids, and worked as a freelance graphic designer. His photos showed him doing regular things, drinking coffee, standing next to a bike, and sitting at a desk. Nothing seemed off. We started messaging and moved to a phone call a few days later. He sounded calm and polite, and he didn't try too hard to impress me. We agreed to meet for a drink at a bar downtown after talking for a while. When we met in person, he looked exactly like his pictures. He was dressed well and had a quiet, confident way of talking. He listened when I spoke and asked thoughtful questions most of the time. I didn't feel rushed or uncomfortable. Our second and third dates went just as smoothly. He didn't give vague answers, didn't make odd excuses about his schedule. Those are all things that happen to me all the time. He texted regularly, but not obsessively, and he didn't try to dominate the conversation. I appreciated the balance. He said his freelance work gave him a lot of flexibility, and that he usually worked from home. He mentioned a few projects he'd worked on for small businesses. The way he explained things made sense, and he didn't sound like he was trying too hard to impress me. I wasn't head over heels, but I liked him. He seemed consistent and low maintenance, which was a welcome change. He never mentioned past relationships, but I didn't press him on that. We met up about once a week and texted in between. Everything felt casual but steady. Then one Friday evening, I was walking with a friend near a restaurant in another part of town. We just left a movie, and we were talking about where to eat when I glanced through a restaurant window. Adam was sitting at a table inside, but he wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, and 2 young kids were with them. They looked like a family. I stopped and told my friend who he was. We both stood there, watching through the glass. It was definitely him. He looked like a father having dinner with his family, but it could have been something innocent, and I wasn't sure at the time. I didn't go inside or confront him. Instead, I told my friend I wanted to wait and follow them. About 20 minutes later, they left the restaurant together. The woman held one child's hand, and Adam held the other. They walked down the sidewalk as a group, chatting normally. I stayed a block behind as they turned into a residential neighborhood. Eventually, they reached a house, and Adam unlocked the door, then the family went inside. I didn't contact Adam right away. I wanted to confirm what I'd seen before saying anything. I spent the next few days looking into it. I started by searching the address I'd followed him to, even though I felt a little creepy doing it. I found the property record, but there was no one named Adam listed. Instead, a different name came up, Michael Adler. I ran that name through Facebook, along with the city. After about an hour of creeping, I found a woman whose face matched the one I'd seen at the restaurant. Her name was Natalie Adler. Most of her profile was private, but a few older photos were public. I looked through them until I found what I needed. One picture showed her with 2 kids and a man standing beside her. It was Adam, although now I knew his name was Michael. The 4 of them were standing in front of the same house I'd seen them enter. The caption mentioned something about a family barbecue. There were other similar photos from birthdays and holidays. They went back years. It became clear that Adam had lied about everything. He wasn't even a freelance designer. He had a wife, 2 children, and a full life that he'd hidden from me. I felt angry more than anything. I trusted that he was being honest, and I had no reason to think otherwise. I didn't want to scream at him or cause a public scene, but I wasn't going to pretend it didn't happen either. I decided to confront him in person, but on my terms. I messaged him and asked if he wanted to meet for coffee. I chose a small cafe we'd visited once before. I brought my phone and kept the camera recording from inside my bag before he arrived. He walked in on time and smiled like nothing was wrong. I let him sit down and asked him how his week had been. Then I told him that I knew who he really was. I said his real name out loud and told him I'd seen him with his wife and children. At first he tried to act confused, but then he fell quiet. I asked him why he lied, but he didn't answer. He just stared down at the table and avoided eye contact. I told him I was recording the conversation, but he didn't react. Then I stood up and said that I hoped his wife would get the truth out of him. Then I left. When I got home, I played back the recording and the audio was clear. I uploaded the video to a private link and sent a short message to his wife on Facebook. I explained that I'd been seeing him under the name Adam and that I only recently found out who he really was. I said I had proof and included the video. I told her I wasn't looking for a reply, but felt that she deserved a no. She never responded, and a few days later, her profile disappeared. Either she blocked me or deactivated her account. I didn't try to reach out again. I blocked Adam on every platform and deleted the dating app entirely. I told a few friends what happened, but I didn't want to keep talking about it. I just wanted it to be over. For a while, I avoided dating apps and didn't go on any new dates. I wasn't afraid, but I didn't feel like dealing with anyone. I didn't blame myself, but the experience made me more careful. I started to pay closer attention to small inconsistencies and avoided people who were too vague or evasive. After a couple of months, I started dating again, but I did things differently. I kept first dates short and simple. I made sure I knew people's last names, and I didn't share too much about myself early on. That didn't mean I stopped trusting people entirely, but I took more time to verify the basics. I never heard from Adam or Michael again. I sometimes wonder what happened after his wife saw the video, but I never tried to find out. I did what I thought was right, and then I moved on. That was enough for me. My name's Sean, and I started using some dating apps a few years ago after a relationship ended. I knew my ex from before the apps really took over, so this was my first experience with them. I started with Tinder, because that was the only one I'd heard of, and it didn't take long before I got a few matches. That must have been beginner's luck. One of them was named Erin, and her profile mentioned she liked hiking and photography, and she had a few pictures of mountain trails and dogs. I had a lot of that stuff on my profile too. I had some photos from Banff, a few shots from the Rockies, and some trail selfies. She messaged me first, and she liked my pictures and asked if I was from Alberta originally. We messaged back and forth for a few days, and eventually exchanged Instagram handles. She didn't say much, but she responded quickly and seemed genuinely interested in the outdoor stuff. I suggested we meet for a drink, and she said yes. We met at a pub near my place. She was on time and dressed nice. She had jeans, sneakers, and her hair was tied back. She was pleasant, soft-spoken, and polite. I tried to keep the conversation going, asking about hikes she liked or where her photos were taken. She gave short answers most of the time. Nothing rude, just not very talkative. She asked me a few things, mostly about what camera I used and whether I preferred solo hikes or group ones. I told her I usually went alone or with a buddy who I used to work with. She smiled and nodded, but didn't say much else. We only stayed for one drink, then I paid the bill, and we walked out together. She said it was nice to meet me, and I told her the same. There was no awkwardness, just a quick goodbye. She didn't text me after, and I didn't either. I didn't feel any real spark, and I figured she didn't either. A couple of days later, I noticed she had liked a bunch of my old photos on Instagram. I don't post that often, and my account only goes back a few years, but she had scrolled all the way back to stuff from 2018. It was every single photo, and I thought it was weird, but harmless. That weekend, I went for a run along a trail I use a few times a week. It's not far from my place, and it's usually empty after dark, which is when I prefer to go. I got home, showered, and was making dinner when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "You looked really focused tonight. Hope the run felt good." I hadn't seen anyone on the trail. There are no streetlights out there, and it's mostly just trees and gravel. I texted back saying, "Who's this?" But I got no reply. I checked my social media, but hadn't posted anything about running lately. I tried to brush it off, but I was really disturbed, and all night I lay awake thinking about it. The next morning, I was still feeling paranoid, so I went out to my car and crawled underneath just to check. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I found something small and black stuck inside the wheel well with magnets. I pried it off and looked it up online. It was a GPS tracker. I put the thing into a plastic bag and drove to the police station. I wasn't sure what they'd do with it, but I didn't want it sitting around. I told the officer at the desk what I'd found and showed him the text I got. He asked if I had any idea who might have sent it, so I gave him Erin's name. I didn't accuse her outright, but she was the only person I'd met recently who might have known where I ran. They took the tracker as evidence and said someone from the tech crimes unit would look into it. I wasn't sure if anything would come of it, because I didn't have any proof it was her, and I figured they might just file it away and forget it. 2 days later, I got a call from a detective, and he asked if I could come in. I went that afternoon. He said they had traced the purchase of the tracker to an Amazon account linked to Erin's name and address. He said they had enough to bring her in. Apparently, she'd also been using a second number to create fake accounts and follow me on social media. Some of the likes on my photos had come from those accounts, not just her main one. I hadn't noticed because the usernames were random and the accounts looked like bots. A few days after that, I got another call saying she'd been arrested and charged with criminal harassment and stalking. They served a warrant at her apartment and found more electronics and several different phones. The detective said they didn't think she had plans to hurt me, but the behavior showed clear intent to monitor and follow me without my knowledge. She didn't seem strange at the time. She was quiet, but nothing alarming. I had no idea she'd taken it that far. After her arrest, the detective told me she'd been released on bail, but had conditions. She wasn't allowed to contact me or come near my home or workplace. There was also a court date set for later in the month. I changed all my social media settings to private. I deleted anything that showed my location or had date tags. I got a new phone number and set up a home security system, just in case. I also started running in different places, and only during the day. I didn't like doing that, but I figured it was smarter. Fortunately, I never heard from her again. The police said she showed up to her court date and pled not guilty, but I didn't follow the case closely. I didn't want to get a restraining order unless I had to. They said if she violated her bail conditions, they'd call me right away. I haven't gone on any dates since. I still go hiking, and I still take photos, but I don't post them anymore. If I share anything, it's through text or email with friends that I trust. It's strange to think how fast something like that can happen. One drink with someone who seemed a little shy, and then a few weeks later, I'm pulling a tracker off my car. I still don't understand what she wanted, or what she thought she was doing. For a while, I kept checking under my car every time I went out. I don't do that anymore, but I still look around more than I used to. It's probably a good habit anyway. I'm Kayla, and I met someone named Marcus on a dating app in early March. His profile said he was new to the city, worked as a chef, and liked quiet nights in. He looked normal, and he had short brown hair with glasses. We messaged for a few days, and he seemed polite, albeit a little awkward, but not in a bad way. I figured he might just be an introvert and a little shy. Our first date was coffee at a place near my apartment. He showed up right on time, dressed well, and asked questions, but didn't talk much about himself. He said he'd just moved from Delaware for work and didn't know many people here yet. We ended up talking for about an hour. It wasn't anything amazing, but it wasn't bad either. We went out 2 more times, once for dinner, then a walk a few days later. He was consistently quiet, but always polite and respectful. He never made a move or crossed any lines, so I didn't feel unsafe or weird around him. There wasn't any spark though, and the conversation felt forced. After the 3rd date, I messaged him to say I didn't feel a connection. I told him I thought he was a good guy, but it wasn't what I was looking for. He replied about an hour later and said he understood. No hard feelings. That was it, and I didn't think about him again. I wasn't going on any dates after that, and I hadn't even messaged anyone since. A week went by, and I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It just said, "Hey, you still in?" I didn't answer because I thought it was a wrong number. A few hours later, there was another one, and it said, "I'm heading over now. Can't wait to meet you." I blocked the number after that and never replied. The next day, someone buzzed my apartment at around 7 p.m. I answered, and a man's voice asked for Kayla. I said that was me. He said that he was here to pick me up for a date. I told him he must be mistaken. He said, "Didn't we match on Hinge?" I said no and hung up. I went downstairs 20 minutes later and saw him standing near the curb, looking at his phone. I was nervous, but I approached him and we talked for a bit. Then he showed me the app. The profile photo was mine, but it was an old one I hadn't used in over a year. The bio listed my real neighborhood and even my actual job title, but it wasn't my account. He apologized and left right away. Then I went back inside and opened every dating app I could think of. On the third one, I found it. Someone had made a fake profile using my photos, my name, and my details. I couldn't access the account, but I reported it right away. At first I assumed it was some scammer using random photos, but whoever made the account knew too much. They knew where I lived, they knew my job, they even used the same phrasing I'd used on my old profile. That's when I remembered that Marcus had asked to follow me on Instagram after our second date. I'd said yes without thinking twice. I created a new profile on the same dating app and set it up to look as normal as possible. After a few swipes, I found the fake account again. I swiped right and matched with it. Then I messaged saying, "Hey, it's Kayla, why are you doing this?" The reply came about an hour later, but it was just some random string of emojis. I stared at it for a while. I tried to get more out of him, but he didn't answer. Then the profile was deleted an hour later when I checked again. I contacted the app's support team and filed a formal report. I sent screenshots, including the one with the message. I also called the non-emergency police line and explained everything to them as well. 2 days later, another man showed up at my building. He buzzed my apartment and started yelling at me. He said someone had convinced him to send money for a rideshare to come meet me. I tried to explain that I had nothing to do with it. Then after a few minutes, he calmed down and left. That's when the police started taking him more seriously. I gave them Marcus's full name, his phone number, and screenshots of our old messages. I also showed them the message from the fake account. At that point, I wasn't even sure if it was Marcus, but he was the only one that I gave my number to around that time. However, the police tracked him down through a phone number linked to the fake account and arrested him at his apartment. They found a spreadsheet on his computer with names, photos, and profile links of at least a dozen women, and I was one of them. They also found dozens of messages with men who thought they were talking to me. Some of them had sent gift cards, and at least one had sent over $1,000. The police told me he'd been doing this for over a year. After his arrest, the detective in charge gave me a call and let me know he'd confessed. He admitted to using my identity because I seemed real and believable, whatever that means. They charged him with fraud, identity theft, and criminal harassment. He was denied bail because of the prior incidents, and because they believed he was likely to flee. I was told I might need to testify if it went to trial, but most of the evidence was digital and already strong. The app developers contacted me separately to say they were improving their verification process. They also took down every profile linked to him. Eventually things settled down, and I didn't get any more texts from random numbers. I think what bothered me the most wasn't just that he used my pictures, it was how normal he'd seemed. He wasn't charming or intense. He didn't ask anything weird, he just sat across from me, asked about my job, and thanked me for dinner. Then he used my identity to scam strangers for money. I know now that it wasn't personal. He probably would have done it to someone else if I hadn't matched with him, but knowing that doesn't really make it any better. My friend Daria had a birthday party last year, and I met a guy named Eric. It was at a wine bar downtown, the kind of place where the music was low enough to have an actual conversation. He was sitting near the end of the table with a group I didn't recognize. When we were introduced, he shook my hand and smiled. It seemed like he was genuinely interested in meeting me. He told me he worked in marketing for a tech company and had moved here from Boston 2 years earlier. I told him I'd been in the city for 6 years. We ended up talking for a while about restaurants and movies. He knew a lot of spots in the city, especially smaller, older places. He wasn't loud or pushy, just confident. Toward the end of the night, he suggested we grab dinner sometime at a restaurant he liked. I said yes without really thinking about it. He suggested Friday, and I agreed. When the day came, he texted to confirm and offered to pick me up. I told him I appreciated the offer, but I'd meet him there instead. The restaurant was in an older part of town, with brick sidewalks and narrow streets. When I went in, it had dim lighting, white tablecloths, and just enough background noise to feel comfortable. He was already seated when I arrived, wearing a dark shirt and looking like he'd made some effort. At first, the conversation was light. We talked about work, favorite foods, and how unpredictable the weather had been. When I told him I worked in human resources for a small company, he asked how big our office was and whether most people worked remotely. It felt like a normal follow-up. Then he asked if my commute was bad. I said no, because I live nearby. All normal stuff so far. That led to a question about which neighborhood I was in. I told him I was near the park, but didn't name the street. He asked which park, and when I answered, he smiled and said he used to live in that area. He asked if my place was one of the newer buildings, or one of the older walk-ups. I gave a vague answer, and tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. For a while, we talked about other things, but then he came back to my neighborhood, asking if my building had parking, or if I parked on the street. I said I didn't really want to talk about where I lived in detail, then he laughed and said he was just curious. A few minutes later, he asked if my apartment got a lot of sunlight and what floor I was on. By then I was starting to notice a pattern, but I told myself maybe he was just trying to find common ground. When we were done, we left, and he walked me to my car. We said goodbye, and he didn't push for a hug or anything more. I left thinking the date had been fine, but that I probably wouldn't see him again. The next day, I didn't hear from him, which I took as a good sign, because I wasn't planning to follow up anyway. I spent most of the day running errands and cleaning my apartment, and by evening, I was watching a show on my laptop. Then I heard a knock at my door. It was close to 10, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Eric standing there. He was holding his phone in one hand and smiling like this was completely normal. I was a little creeped out, but I opened the door. I left the chain lock on, though. "Hey," he said. "I think I left my phone in your car last night." I told him that wasn't possible, because we'd both driven separately and I hadn't given him a ride anywhere. He laughed and said that he'd tracked it to my building, so he knew it was there. I said I didn't have it and that he should call the restaurant. He kept smiling and said it would just take a second to come in and check. At that point, I told him I wasn't letting him in. His smile didn't drop, but his tone changed. He said it would be easier if I cooperated, because he was just trying to get his stuff. I stepped back from the door and told him to leave. I went to the window in my living room that overlooked the building's front entrance. He was outside now, looking at the keypad on the side door that residents used. He tried the handle, then walked toward the back of the building. I grabbed my phone and considered calling the building's security, but I held off. That's when I heard a noise from my fire escape. I froze where I was and listened. The metal steps rattled softly, and then I saw his head appear at the top. He was on the landing, looking at my window. I backed away and dialed 911. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and move somewhere safe. I went into my bedroom and closed the door, even though I knew it wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in. I heard him trying the window latch, but it wouldn't open, and then a few minutes later, the sound stopped. I heard voices outside, and the operator told me that the police had arrived. I stayed in my room until they knocked on my door. When I opened up, 2 officers were standing there. One stayed with me while the other went back outside. Through my window, I saw Eric in handcuffs. He didn't resist the cops, but he kept talking to them like this was some kind of misunderstanding. The officer with me asked if I knew him well. I explained how we'd met and that we went out one time. He said they found him on the fire escape trying to pry open my window with a small screwdriver. He would be charged with attempted burglary and trespassing. They asked if I wanted to press charges, and I said yes. I also handed over my phone so they could see the texts we exchanged before the date. The officer said it would help establish that we didn't have any prior relationship beyond that one dinner. After they left, I sat in my living room for a long time, because I was way too shaken to go to bed. A detective called me the next day to say Eric had been denied bail because of prior arrests for other stuff. He'd approached other women the same way, gaining bits of personal information, and then showing up uninvited. In some cases, he'd stolen from them. Friends told me that I was smart to call the police when I did. I agreed, but I also thought about how close I came to ignoring the red flags at dinner. If he'd been just a little less obvious, I might have agreed to see him again. That thought stayed with me more than anything else. I was using dating apps a lot in around 2018. I'm married now, but back then, I was dating a lot. In fact, I was getting so comfortable with meeting strangers that I probably let my guard down a little too much. One of the guys I met was named Justin. His profile was pretty cool. His messages were easy to respond to, and he didn't come across creepy like a lot of dudes. We had a few short conversations on the phone over the course of a week. After that, he asked if I wanted to get coffee. I agreed because he seemed normal and I wanted to meet someone in person instead of just talking online forever. We met at a cafe on the east side of the city. It was one of those places that roast their own beans and has shelves full of local art for sale. I got there first and sat near the front window. He walked in a few minutes later, right on time. He looked the same as his pictures, maybe a little taller. He wore jeans and a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. We got our drinks and talked for a while. The conversation didn't have any awkward pauses, which was unusual for a first date. He asked about my job, my family, and my favorite places to travel. He told me he worked in IT for a manufacturing company and had recently moved into a condo near the river. He said he liked to take weekend drives to parks outside the city to get away from the noise. It was still early in the afternoon when we finished our coffee, so he suggested we go for a drive. He said there was a park about 40 minutes away with a nice view of the lake. I hesitated for a second, but didn't see a reason to say no. He'd been nothing but polite, and it didn't feel rushed or strange. He drove an older dark blue Subaru that was clean inside, but the fabric seats were worn and there was a faint smell of air freshener. He kept the radio low and talked most of the way, pointing out neighborhoods he liked. I noticed he kept checking his mirrors more than most people, but I didn't think much of it at the time. About 20 minutes into the drive, we turned off the main road and onto a narrower 2-lane route that cut through farmland. The houses were spaced far apart, and some of them looked abandoned. There weren't any stores or gas stations in sight. We just passed a long stretch of open field when the car jerked and made a loud clunking sound. He pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. The engine sputtered and then shut off completely. He tried to start it again, but it only made a grinding noise. He cursed under his breath and got out, then said he needed to check the engine. I stayed in the passenger seat and watched him prop the hood open. He leaned over the engine for a minute, then walked back to my side of the car. He said something was seriously wrong and that we needed to find help. I asked if he could call roadside assistance, but he said his phone had no service. I checked mine and saw the same. He said the nearest house was a 15-minute walk back and that he'd go alone so I wouldn't have to walk in the heat. At first I thought it was considerate, but then he closed the hood and started walking without looking back. I expected him to check in after a minute, or at least wave, but he just kept going until he was out of sight. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes before I started to feel scared. I tried my phone again and moved around in the seat, holding it up toward the window. The signal flickered between one bar and nothing. I got out of the car and walked a short distance down the road toward the direction he'd gone. There was no sign of him by then. The road was empty, and the only sound was the wind moving through the tall grass. I went back to the car and tried to convince myself that he'd found help and would be back soon, but my gut told me something was wrong. Eventually, I managed to get enough signal to send a text to my friend Mandy. I typed that I was stuck on a country road with a guy I just met and that he'd gone to get help but disappeared. She replied right away, asking for my location. I sent a pin, and she said she was leaving immediately. It took her about 30 minutes to reach me. When she pulled up behind the car, I got in with her and told her everything. She asked if I wanted to call the police, but I said maybe we should look for him first in case there was some innocent explanation. She turned the car around, and we drove slowly down the road in the direction he'd walked. We didn't see him anywhere, and after a while, we decided to head back toward the main road. As we rounded a bend, I noticed a red pickup truck coming toward us. It passed slowly, and I thought I saw Justin in the passenger seat, but I couldn't be certain. I told Mandy what I thought I saw. She asked if I wanted to turn around and follow the truck, but it was already too far ahead, and I wasn't sure it was him. I decided to try calling him instead. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking if he was okay, and told him where the car was. By the time we got back to the city, I still hadn't heard from him. Later that night, I sent him a short text asking if he'd made it home, but there was no reply. The next day, I checked the dating app to see if he had been online, but his profile was gone. I figured maybe he just decided to ghost me, and the whole thing had been some bizarre coincidence. After a day of not hearing from him, I started to get really worried, but since we didn't have any friends in common, I had to call the police. At the time, I was worried that he'd gotten lost or worse. The police did a wellness check on him and told me that he was fine. Although I was relieved, it still seemed suspicious. Me and my friends talked about what could possibly have happened, but nothing really made sense. My friend Dale thought it was a trap, and the pickup truck was him going back to get me. I've thought it all through many times, and I'm still not sure. Mandy told me I was lucky, but at the time, I didn't feel that way. Justin, or whatever his name was still out there somewhere, and every time I thought I saw his face in a crowd, I caught myself looking for the nearest way out. Last winter, I met someone named Jason through a coworker who thought we'd get along. I gave him my number through our friend, and we started messaging. He seemed easygoing over text, and we agreed to go out for dinner. He offered to pick me up, and I figured it was fine since we had a mutual connection. He showed up about 5 minutes early, driving a clean silver car. He was dressed casually but neat. When I got in the car, he smiled and asked if I liked Italian food. I said I did, and we made small talk on the way to the restaurant. Right away, I noticed how often he looked at his phone. It was sitting in the cup holder, and every time it buzzed, he glanced at it quickly before setting it back down. Sometimes his jaw tightened a little, but he still kept up the conversation. I asked if he was waiting on an important message from work, and he said something vague about having a lot going on this week. He didn't elaborate, so I let it go. When we got there, the restaurant was quiet for a Friday night. We went in, got a table, then ordered drinks and shared an appetizer. The conversation flowed well, as long as we stuck to light topics. However, when I asked if he'd been in a long-term relationship before, he paused for a few seconds before saying, "Yeah, but it ended kinda badly." I asked what happened, and he looked down at his plate and said he didn't want to get into it. I decided to change the subject, and that seemed to get him to relax again. Aside from that, dinner went well. He was polite, asked about my work and family, and seemed genuinely interested in what I said. I noticed he didn't drink much, which I took as a good sign since he was driving. When the bill came, he insisted on paying. We walked out to the car, and it was only around 9, so I agreed when he asked if he could drive me home. We were about 10 minutes into the drive when I noticed a dark SUV behind us. Jason was quiet, and he was looking in the rearview mirror more than he looked at me. After a couple more minutes, he suddenly asked if I minded stopping for gas before he dropped me off. I said it was fine. We pulled into a gas station, and as we parked, I saw the same SUV pull in and stop a couple spaces away. I didn't say anything at first because I wasn't sure if it was just a coincidence, but I saw Jason glance at it and then quickly look away. Something felt off. Jason got out to start pumping gas, and I stayed in the car. I looked over at the SUV and saw a woman in the driver's seat staring in our direction. She didn't get out, and she didn't seem to be waiting for gas. I rolled down the window and asked Jason if he knew her. He froze for a second, then said we would talk in a minute. When he got back in the car, I pressed him again. He sighed and said, "That's my ex. She's been following me lately." I asked if this was a one-time thing, and he shook his head. He said she'd been showing up at places he went, leaving messages on his phone, and even coming to his apartment uninvited. He said he'd been trying to ignore her so she'd go away, but it clearly wasn't working. I asked if she'd ever been violent. He hesitated before saying she once threw something at him during an argument, and had broken his phone another time. He said she had a temper and didn't like to be ignored. That explained why he'd been watching his phone all night. I told him he should probably call the police, but he seemed unsure at first, saying he didn't want to make things worse. I pointed out that she was right there following him, and it wasn't safe to just drive off and hope she lost interest. Also, I didn't want her to know where I lived. He finally agreed, then I pulled my phone out and offered to call, but he said he would do it. He got out of the car again, walked a few steps away, and called the police. I watched as the woman in the SUV leaned forward in her seat like she was trying to hear. A couple of minutes later, Jason came back and said an officer was on the way. He asked if I was okay staying until they arrived. I told him I was fine. We sat there in silence for a while, and Jason kept his eyes on the SUV. The woman didn't move her car, and it felt like she was making a point by staying put. It wasn't until we saw a police car pull into the lot that she finally started her engine. She backed out quickly, but the officer turned on his lights and followed her out. The police officer came back after a few minutes and told Jason they stopped her and would speak with him further at the station. Since I didn't have my car there, I had to have the police drive me home. While we waited around, Jason thanked me for convincing him to call. He admitted he'd been worried about bringing it up during dinner because he didn't want me to think he was unstable or had drama in his life. I told him that not telling me would have been worse, especially if she tried something while I was with him. He agreed and said he'd been making excuses to avoid dealing with it. The second police car arrived and one of the officers gave me a ride. It was awkward, but the cops were pretty nice overall. They dropped me off at my place, and I went inside feeling weird, but glad nothing happened. Jason texted me later that night to say they'd taken her in for questioning, and he was already heading home. I didn't know if there would be a second date at the time, and I later decided not to get involved with Jason anymore. He was a good guy, but he needed to get some things sorted out first. Still, I was glad I'd gone with my instincts at the gas station. If I hadn't, that stalker chick might have found out where I lived.